Welcome back to the Outlet Podcast with Gabe and Eric. I'm Gabe.
And I'm Eric.
All right. And a lot has happened in the past week.
A lot has happened in the past week.
And glad you could join us this Friday.
Of course. So we'll jump right into it. So I want to talk specifically about Trump's verbal response to the coronavirus, right? Now, on previous podcasts, we've talked about, the legislative response, the CARES Act, where that money has gone, why that money, could have spent in better places, how it was sort of a unutilitarian use of those funds. But today I want to focus specifically on Trump and what he says publicly, right?
Yeah.
And the impact of those public statements and how they have had negative impacts, essentially, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's really two parts of his verbal statements that I want to focus on. One being his negation of the problem itself, right? He's consistently said, we've got it under control. It's a Democratic hoax. All of those sorts of things, which I think has led to his base, mostly Republicans, reacting less to the coronavirus and not respecting it as the problem it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'll get into that in a second, right? In the second half is his scapegoating of China as the cause of this problem, right? And that scapegoating has had an extremely negative impact on Asian Americans here in America who have experienced, drastically more, racial threats, racial violence, hate speech, all those sorts of things, just for being Asian American in America, right? And I think that Trump's rhetoric has greatly encouraged his base to engage in that rhetoric, because when you scapegoat a whole country, your base wants to scapegoat that same country, and they do what they can in their everyday lives to help engage in that scapegoating.
Yeah.
Which means attacking the Asian Americans that you see every day, right?
Yep.
So we'll start with Trump's negation of the problem of coronavirus. So here I've got a list of quotes going in chronological order, starting in January 20th, right? In January 20th, he said, "We have it totally under control. It's going to be just fine," right? And then February 19th, "I think it's going to work out fine. I think that when we get into April and the warmer weather, that has a very negative effect on that." Now we're in April. We can see that it's still gone. It's going real hard, right?
Yeah, we actually had a spike in deaths, I think, yesterday.
Yeah. We're far from overcoming this problem, right?
That's for sure.
And then later in February, he said, "We only have 15 people. They're getting better, and hopefully they'll all be better soon," right? And then a couple days later, "Now the Democrats are politicizing coronavirus, and this is their new hoax," right? So blaming the Democrats for the coronavirus, and by calling it a hoax, he's negating the problem that it actually is, right?
Did he call the virus itself a hoax?
Yeah, he said, "And this is their new hoax," right?
Well,
So,
could he just be referring to just politicizing because it's an election year and they want to make Trump look bad to an extent.
Mm-hmm. I mean, definitely, right? The Democrats do not have pure altruistic intentions, right? But by pointing the blame at the Democrats and saying that they are using this as a political tool, he is inherently implying to his base that this is just a political tool. It's not a real threat to your life. You shouldn't take it seriously because it's a Democratic hoax like all of the other hoaxes, right? So if a person didn't care about the Russia investigation, they didn't care about all the other things that the Democrats have used to attack Trump over the past 4 years, they're probably not going to care about this virus, right, which is not a political thing, right, but it's being used and portrayed as a political thing, and so people that are generally against the Democrats are much less likely to respect it as the threat to their lives that it is.
Yeah, because there's an assumption with saying that it's another hoax by the Democrats. The assumption that's built into that is the virus is not as serious as it is.
Right. It's fake, essentially.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Don't worry about it. You don't have to worry about it. Right.
Because he's trying to say that the politicians, the Democrats, are trying to use this and upplay it as some sort of political weapon.
Exactly.
While the upplay is actually warranted because it is as serious as it is.
Exactly. Yeah. And later I'm gonna give some data, showing exactly the difference between the reactions of the Republican part of America and the Democratic part of America, just to show that there is some disparity there, right? But we're gonna continue through the Trump quotes, just to really set the base of this is how he's responded to it, right? He says, "It's a very contagious virus. It's incredible, but it's something that we have tremendous control over," which in itself
Is a contradicting
yeah,
statement.
exactly. It's tremendous. I was talking about what we were doing. What we're doing is under control, but I'm not talking about the virus. it's hard for me to read these just because grammatically they're all over the place and they
Yeah.
don't really make any sense at all.
He's a New Yorker too. I mean, he has a very particular way of speaking.
Yeah,
Tremendous.
definitely.
Like,
Tremendous.
I don't know if I've ever used the word
No,
tremendous
no.
in conversation.
No, it's one of his favorite words.
Tremendous.
Incredible, tremendous.
Tremendous.
Yeah, yeah. He says, "I have a feeling that a lot of the numbers that are being said in some areas are just bigger than they are going to be." Which, doesn't make a lot of sense grammatically, but essentially he's just negating the numbers that are being reported. He says that they're overinflated. They're not, in reality, they're not actually that high. While in reality, we've seen that numbers have actually been underreported, right? Not all the people that needed to be tested have been tested. We've not rolled out any sort of national testing program, so there's a ton of cases that have been undiagnosed. So he's directly contradicting reality and, once again, undercutting the problem and negating its real severity and telling his base that they don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, but he has said that China's reports are significantly low, and he doesn't believe them.
Yeah, and I mean, that is a real thing that we need to address, right? China has a consistent pattern of underreporting or overreporting numbers for the benefit of the CCP, right? That is something that they've proven time and time again. Overestimated economic growth or underestimated certain threats within the country, right? And coronavirus is one area where they have underreported numbers, right? There is a resurgence of the virus in Wuhan right now that is not being reported on at all because the Chinese state has already declared we're done with it, we won, right? So that is a problem, right? And that is something that the Chinese government should not be engaging in.
Yeah.
I mean, I see why they're doing it, right? They want to uphold social control, right? And spreading pandemic-related fear and chaos throughout the country would undermine, their position and the position of the economy, right? They want everybody to think everything is okay, and they deal with it behind the scenes, right? And that's the tactic that the Chinese state's presidents say that's how they should act, right? But I don't think that they should act that way necessarily.
No, of course not.
It makes sense why they're acting that way.
Sure.
But I also think that just because China, our geopolitical enemy, is acting that way does not mean that we have to replicate that action, right?
Yeah.
If we want to be better than China, we have to act that way, and we can't just say that, right?
Certainly. And I mean, I don't know if we're falsifying reports as well. I mean, it's possible, but it seems like we're reporting. First off, when you're talking about reported cases, first off, you got to consider about how many people are actually infected that have not been reported. So, I haven't done any real estimations, but it would seem like to me that of the reported cases, there's at least double the reported cases. And it could be a lot more than that for sure, but But reported cases means that you got tested and the test came back positive, and then they marked it down as you have coronavirus.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm sure there's tons of people who have still not been tested for coronavirus, even if they're feeling sick.
Yeah, and I mean not only that, but I've read cases of tests coming back negative when in reality they should have come back positive.
Really?
Right?
So the test itself isn't.
The
even
test
reliable.
itself is faulty, right? So yes, there's a myriad of problems with reporting the real coronavirus numbers, but I think that as a precautionary step, we should always overestimate them, right? And we should react as if it is a critical threat to our nation itself, right? It's a threat to our national security. It is a threat to our lives and our health and our safety, and we need to take extra steps in order to fight that as a precaution, right?
Yeah.
It might not be as severe as it is, right? But it's better to be safe than sorry, right?
Yeah, it's better to have a hyper reaction, especially when you're dealing with a virus, like especially one that can spread as quickly as this one.
Yeah, and not only spread but mutate, right? I mean, if we don't really clamp down on it now and we let it just simmer continuously throughout America forever, it's going to continually mutate. The next vaccine isn't going to, it's going to be able to mutate and fight against whatever vaccine is going to get more powerful, and it's going to continue to spread, and it will be a seasonal disease that kills tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of Americans. So I think that now that our economy is already in the pits, it's already shut down, we need to take all the steps we possibly can, empower all the institutions that are fighting this virus, and take all the necessary measures in order to combat it, right? Both as individuals and as a society.
Yeah, well, there's a few drawbacks with doing that, though. Is if you decide to have a hyper reaction and shut everything down, then the economy suffers as a result of it. And, the government at this point has unlimited QE. They can print as much money as they want for whatever reason they want.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think they've dumped $5 trillion and still climbing amounts of money into the economy just to be able to prop up the stock market.
Yeah.
And to basically artificially jack up the prices of stocks. And it's not good because that trillions and trillions of dollars that they're spending has to be repaid, and it will eventually be repaid by our generation.
Yeah.
So, and that's a whole nother problem. But if
Yeah.
you have such a hyper reaction to the virus, then the economy suffers. So what they're trying to do is find a balance between how much do we react in shutting things down and how much do we keep open, and it should be purely based off the numbers of things.
Yeah,
Which
yeah.
is why reporting cases is super, super important.
Yeah.
Because then they know how much to shut down and how much to keep open.
Yeah, definitely. But I mean, one additional problem that's attached to the government bailouts at the scale that they are at right now is inflation, right? And inflation isn't really something that we've talked about much on this podcast, and we'll get back to the Trump trade in a second. But I think that it's important to address why inflation is a bad thing, because most Americans, as we continue through our everyday lives, we hear inflation every once in a while, right? And we hear that it has a negative connotation, right? We want to stave off inflation. We don't want to, do anything that results in inflation. But I think that not a lot of Americans know exactly why it's a bad thing, right? And inflation is basically the process that means money is worth less and less as time goes on, right? Like if you look at old movies, you could buy an ice cream float for a penny, right, in the 1930s, right?
Yeah.
Now an ice cream float, it's like $7-8,
Yeah, you've
right?
seen those Western films where they ask for a drink at the bar and
Yeah.
they flick a nickel at
Exactly,
it,
exactly. Now nickels can't buy anything,
Yeah,
right?
seriously,
Yeah, exactly.
seriously.
Not
Pennies
even a
are
piece of
worthless,
candy. Yeah. So that's essentially the process of inflation, right? And it continues at a relatively steady rate. It's just something that's innate in our economy, right? As the economy grows, more money is put into it, and goods generally get more and more expensive, right? That money is worth less and less, per unit, right? But the problem with rapid inflation is that it hurts the savings of the middle class, right? Because let's say you have $100,000 in savings account right now, right? Just cash, that's a number in a savings account, right? That money can buy, let's say, half of one house in Ohio, right? You can buy half of a house. That's the down payment for the house, and if you save up another $100,000, you can buy a full house, right? But if inflation skyrockets, right, and that money is worth significantly less money, now all of a sudden that $100,000 may only be able to buy a quarter of a house or a 16th of a house, right?
Sure.
So it's worth significantly less in terms of material goods that you can exchange for that money, right? And the reason that specifically impacts the middle class is because the middle class are the people that have the most cash savings, right? Because inflation is something that only impacts cash savings, right? If you have your savings invested in real estate or stocks or any other sort of asset, that asset will appreciate along with inflation, right? If you actually own $100,000 worth of real estate and inflation halves the amount that money is worth, now all of a sudden that real estate is worth twice the amount in currency units, right?
That's right, because all you do is you change the price of the asset.
Exactly, but it doesn't lose its ultimate worth as compared
yep.
to other goods in society, right?
That's right, but if it's just a dollar and then the dollar loses the value, then the material goods that you can buy also decreases.
Exactly.
Right?
So you lose your savings essentially if inflation skyrockets, right? And so wealthy people have their money invested in assets, right, which appreciate with inflation, right? And poor people don't really have that much savings to rely on, essentially, right, which is a fundamental flaw of capitalism, right? And it's something we've discussed time and time again, right? Almost half of Americans don't have $1,000 in their savings account, right? But so they are not as impacted by inflation as much as the middle class, because the middle class are the people that have their savings in cash.
Yeah, and we've seen hyperinflation in history many times. Germany and Ethiopia are two great examples of where their dollar lost almost all of its value.
Yeah.
There was I saw a picture of a $1 billion bill.
Yeah.
Right, because because the dollar had lost so much money that $1 billion bill became the $1 bill.
Yeah, exactly.
And
It's a lot of zeros.
that's a lot of zeros.
Yeah.
And in Germany they were using the money as fuel for fires.
Yeah, exactly. Because you bring home a wheelbarrow full of cash as your day's pay, and it's just inefficient to go down the market with a wheelbarrow full of cash to buy one loaf of bread.
That's right.
So you just start bartering, right? And
Yeah.
society regresses from a currency standpoint to just a barter system essentially, right?
That's right. So what the United States is trying to do is maintain the value of its currency while still dumping trillions and trillions of dollars into the economy. It's like it's going to be a hard balancing act.
Yeah, I mean, it's dumping money into the economy without any sort of material increase in wealth is the basic recipe for inflation, right? When you do that, all economists say, yes, you get inflation, right? Because the only reason our money has value is because it's attached to material wealth, right? The only reason a dollar is so powerful is because it can buy so much stuff here in America, right? But if all of a sudden the amount of dollars doubles in the world, right? There's just twice as many dollars out in the world, but the amount of stuff you can buy remains the same. That dollar is half as valuable, right? It's just basic math, basic arithmetic. And to me, there's no way we can dump trillions and trillions of dollars into the economy while the economy is shrinking and not have any inflation as a result, right? And this is a balance that the treasurer, the Secretary of the Treasury, and the Federal Reserve have tried to toe very carefully over the past 60 years since we've gone off the gold standard. Is how do we keep the economy boosted while not skyrocketing inflation, right? But now all of a sudden, in the face of a crisis, all of those rules and all of those precedents have kind of been thrown out the window in order to save the oligarchs companies here in America, right?
Oligarchs.
Yeah, I mean, and I mean that's another thing with the coronavirus is that it has the response has gone specifically to the extremely wealthy here in America disproportionately, right? Millionaires are receiving tons and tons of tax breaks, and when you compare that to the average amount that regular people get, it is significantly less. And I'm gonna give me 1 second. Fuck, I fucked it up. Whatever. I was gonna pull up some data on that, but I think we can go over that in the next podcast. Is specifically how much does the CARES package passed by Congress benefit the wealthy, and how much does it benefit the working class?
Yeah, well, it benefits the wealthy. We could just say that outright.
Outright, right? And not only just in straight payments, but in tax cuts.
Yeah.
That's something that they've hidden within this bill, is they've reduced the tax rate for the highest earners in this country by a significant amount, right? And they tuck that in nicely into this CARES package because this is something that they that's an agenda that they've been wanting to pass for a long time. And in this time of crisis, nobody's going to stand against a CARE package to the American people. So they just tucked it in nicely and give a fat tax cut to all of the billionaire donors to the Republican Party. But we can go over that in detail in the next podcast. Let's go back to Trump's response.
Oh, that's what we were on.
That's what we were on, right?
Yeah. We went off on inflation for a little bit.
Exactly.
Can I bring this one last point for inflation? I thought about this for a little bit. Is that why couldn't the government just give everyone $1 million, right? Because if the government just printed $1 million and gave it to everyone, then why wouldn't everyone just have $1 million now? And it'd be great. It'd be tremendous.
Yeah, incredible.
The reason why is because if everyone has $1 million, then the prices for the material goods will artificially be jacked up to meet the amount of cash that the people do have now, right? So that's I think we hit on all the points on inflation, but I just wanted to bring up that last point: is why couldn't the government just give everyone $1 million?
Yeah.
But
definitely that $1 million has to come from somewhere.
Yeah.
AKA the Walton family's pockets.
Walton family.
Just a little scoop, right?
Yeah, just throw that in there.
Yeah, exactly. They are so disgustingly rich.
They had the highest GDP per company in America.
Yeah,
for the last 20 years.
They're wealthier than half of the countries. They're the world's nations, right? The Walton family itself is wealthier than Zambia
Yeah.
or
Probably like all the African countries.
Exactly, or
Yeah.
Guyana, or the Antilles.
Except for Nigeria.
Yeah.
Nigeria probably has them. Well, I don't know.
Pretty good size. They're the biggest economy in Africa.
In
yeah.
Africa, I know that,
Um,
but the Walton
Yeah,
family.
fuck the Walton.
They had. I want to search up their GDP.
Yeah.
Because it was so crazy.
Yeah,
Like,
it's nuts.
for like the last 20 years, they've been the number one exchanged. People have brought their cash to Walmart more
Yeah.
than they've brought their cash to any other company for like the last 20
Yeah,
years.
it's crazy, and it's all because they have extremely predatory business practices. Of,
Yeah, of moving into a small town.
moving into a small town, undercutting all of the existing stores,
Yeah,
which
yeah,
are
yeah.
one store establishments where they
Exactly.
can't engage in a price battle against the biggest company on the planet, and so they all get driven out of business, and then they jack their prices right back up, and Walmart's the only store in town, and everybody has to
Yeah,
buy
exactly.
Walmart.
Everyone went out
Yeah,
of business.
Exactly.
Like if you were a clothes company
Yeah.
in a small town
Yeah.
and Walmart comes in,
Yeah.
yeah, why would anyone go to your clothes store?
Yeah,
anymore?
exactly.
It's like
You
I can
can
go
get
to Walmart.
$1 T-shirts
Exactly.
at Walmart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hanes.
Exactly. and then on top of that, they mooch off taxpayers by paying their employees such a low wage that they qualify for all sorts of federal programs, right? So Walmart employees are the biggest recipients of food stamps, of all sorts of these welfare programs that are paid
Yeah.
for by taxpayers. So we are actually boosting the Walton's wealth just through these
I wanna
welfare
read-
programs where they're underpaying their workers to such a high
Well,
amount. Yeah.
yeah. I mean,
Go
they
ahead, go
definitely
ahead.
do employ a large portion of the
Right, but they
economy.
underpay them so much, right?
Yeah.
So
well,
the
let me
actual-
read the stat.
people-
This is
yeah, go ahead.
This
go
is
ahead. Sorry,
crazy.
sorry,
I just
sorry.
searched this up and I
Yeah,
gotta share
yeah.
it. U.S. retailer Walmart, with revenue of $486 billion in 2017, out-earned the sixth largest economy in the Eurozone, Belgium.
Oh my god,
If it were a country, Walmart would be ranked 24th in the world by GDP.
that's insane.
That's insane.
That's so nuts.
They could be their own economy.
Yeah, yeah. And
Just Walmart.
and we're gonna go on a little Walmart rant here, right? But one of the things that they specifically did that they've done to make themselves so profitable is that they've monopolized, right? And that's a guaranteed tactic to make sure that you retain all the profits from your upfront retailer, right? And that's something that the Rockefellers did to build Standard Oil, right? Is that you buy up the supply chain until every link in the supply chain is owned by you, so you reap the profits from every step of the supply chain,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And not only that, but they've essentially established the company town model in a lot of their stores, right? So they've made sure that their employees spend all of their money back into the Walmart corporation, right? So there's a Walmart phone plan, right? So instead of buying your phone plan from Verizon or AT&T, you just get it from Walmart, right? So that
They have their
that-
own cell towers?
They have their own cell towers, and they offer their own cell phone service to their employees, right?
Oh my goodness.
Just so that portion of the paycheck goes back into Walmart, right? And they give discounts so that the employees spend all of their money at Walmart. You buy all your groceries there, you buy your clothes there. So that portion of your paycheck goes back to Walmart. The only thing that they don't have is real estate attached to Walmart, and that's the next step, right? Is they're going to have Walmart
houses.
Walmart
Oh my
houses
goodness.
for their employees, so that the rent check goes back into Walmart.
That
right?
would be insane.
And so that way, all of the wages that they put out to give to the employees just gets cycled back into the corporation at the end of the day through all of these branches and subsidiaries, right? So they're using this massive pot of money that they're sitting on to expand like an octopus or a virus through
I've seen
through
that
the
political
American
cartoon.
yeah exactly through the American economy, just buying and gobbling up every single step of the way until America is just this massive super corporation known as Walmart, where everything is bought and sold by Walmart. And
They got some competition.
yeah, they do have some competition. Obviously, I'm exaggerating, and speaking in
They got
absolutes
some
here,
competition. But that's just crazy to me that the money that they pay their workers
yeah,
is going back to them.
going back to them.
So
right?
it's as if they're not even paying workers.
Exactly, and they're paying them so little in the first place that it's not. It doesn't even matter that much,
Walmart, man, it's such an anomaly. Like, it's
They
such
have
an
Walmarts
anomaly.
in China.
Yeah.
I went to Walmart in China, and it's nuts because it's like exactly the same. It's the same, white linoleum floors and fluorescent lights and just endless
Blue.
hallways and blue uniforms, and of course everything's in Chinese and they sell Chinese things. But
Sure.
it's like kind of scary how it's like you've entered the same plane of existence.
The global economy, man.
Yeah, exactly.
The global economy.
Yeah. super weird. Anyway, back to Trump. So
we could have a whole podcast just
Just
dedicated
about,
to
just about Walmart.
Just
Fuck Walmart. Fuck all of them.
Oh man.
But yeah, so
I think, we've gone off track here a little bit, obviously. I talked about like 8 different things.
That's how it should be.
That's how it should be, right? That's if you
don't like that, sorry, that's
Sorry,
just
I
what
mean,
this podcast
We're
is.
we're
Yeah.
very eclectic thinkers.
yeah, exactly. But yeah, I've read a couple of quotes from Donald Trump, right?
I'll give you a couple more just to establish his pattern of negating the coronavirus and the threat that it is, and we'll examine the impact that's had on the response of his base.
Right?
Can I say something to the credit of Donald Trump?
Of course.
To my knowledge,
Yeah.
the only other president
Mm-hmm.
that has had, weekly briefings
Mm-hmm.
was FDR,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I do really appreciate,
Mm-hmm.
even though Donald Trump does say some wacky things,
Yeah.
from time to time,
Mm-hmm.
he's at least showing his face
Mm-hmm.
to the American people.
Yeah.
Like that, I don't know the actual, if it's really benefiting the lives of the American people, but him going and having his COVID task force in the front, and saying that we're trying our best to handle this, and we're at least doing what we can, and there's some speculation about whether or not it's actually doing anything and if it's actually effective or not.
Yeah.
But at least he's showing his face to the American people,
Right.
and that gives them hope,
Yeah.
which hope people need during this time.
Yeah.
I gotta hope this is gonna get better.
Definitely.
Right? And there's a lot of people out there. I mean, people are committing suicide, man. Because they're seriously afraid of this. And I don't know if you've read about the symptoms of coronavirus.
It's horrible.
Like, it's a really horrible. So there was an Olympic swimmer for I forget what country. I think it was South Africa, who got the coronavirus. Olympic swimmer, right? And he's like, I don't know, 33 or something like that.
Yeah.
He's a prime age, He got the coronavirus, and he was saying that it was difficult for him to take a walk.
Damn.
This is like probably the healthiest guy. He's probably part of the healthiest population in the world. He's an Olympian.
Yeah.
He's an Olympian. He got the coronavirus, and he's saying it was difficult for him to walk down the street.
Yeah.
And his symptoms were extraordinarily bad.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a terrible virus. Like, it really hurts people. 6% of the people who get it are dying.
Yeah. It's nuts.
And the symptoms themselves are freaking ridiculous.
Yeah. Which is why I'm very cautious to, put the economy ahead of people's lives, right? Like, this is such a horrible thing. And I mean, we can always reboost GDP, right? We know how to do that, right? We know how to spur the economy. We know how to, deficit spend so it gets right back. We've done it 100 times.
Mm-hmm.
What we can't do is get people's lives back. And we can't, undo the suffering that people go through as a result of, neglectful decisions by our institutions, right? Which is why I've taken the position of we need to do everything we possibly can. Fuck the economy. I don't really care about the economy right now. I care about people's lives and the suffering of the American people, right?
Yeah, well, and that's like
And
the
it's
big
kind
debate.
of it's kind of a naive position to take,
Sure,
right? Because
sure.
it's hard to take an absolute position because obviously when the economy tanks, the American people suffer as well, right?
Oh yeah.
But I think that right now, all we need to do, and obviously it's not all we need to do, right? But all we need to do is protect the people that have it and prevent more people from getting it, right?
That should be the primary concern.
That is it, right? And if that means stopping people from going outside, stopping people from working in call centers, or reducing the contact that allows this virus to spread, I don't really care about the secondary impacts of those decisions. Right now, it's all about protecting the American people and the health and the well-being of the American people, right? Everything else be damned, right? That's the one goal, and that should be the one priority of everybody in leadership in this country, right? That's it, right? And it's not a simple goal. Obviously, there's a million different tactics that you can take to combat it, but that should be the one priority. And it seems like a lot of our government are focused on secondary priorities of bailing out airlines and giving tax cuts to millionaires, which
To cruise liners.
to cruise liners, like that should not be a priority at all. That should not be what our Congress people are working on, right? It
Yeah.
should be about protecting the American people.
Yeah, really,
That's it. That's the end of the line.
That is it. It's as simple as that. The primary concern of our government currently should be just that.
Yeah.
Making sure that we help the people who are infected and prevent people from getting infected. That's it. Those are the two things.
Right.
And bailing out cruise liners, I just don't see how that helps the the majority of the population.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Like if you bail out a cruise liner, that helps 0.01% of the
Right,
population.
right.
And that's the owner of Carnival.
Right.
You know,
exactly.
Like, and really, what's happening, the way I see it, you just got your Trump bucks in the mail, and that's going right into a savings account. You told
Yeah.
me before the podcast.
Yeah.
But what's really happening with the Trump bucks? First off, he put his name on the right, didn't he?
Yeah.
He put his name, Trump or
Exactly.
whatever.
Yeah. The Trump, relief check or whatever.
Trump relief check.
I didn't see the check physically myself, but
But it has his name on it.
yeah, exactly. And a whistleblower in the Treasury said that specific move delayed the response by about a week. These checks could have been sent out a week earlier if he didn't, have such a massively inflated ego that he wanted his name on all of these checks.
Oh, yeah. I don't know.
Who's surprised, man? Like he puts his name on airplanes and hotels.
Trump steaks.
Yeah,
Trump
exactly.
hotels.
Steaks and wine and whatever he can. He just slaps his name on it.
It's branding, man. It's
Exactly,
branding.
exactly.
What was I talking about? Oh, yeah. The bailouts, right? So the way that I see it, the Trump bucks, what they're doing.
Mhm.
So $1,200 to the American population is not near as much as he's giving to bail out corporations. Just say that outright.
Yeah.
There's the money, the stimulus money that's coming to not stimulus money, but the money that's going to the American people
Yeah.
is significantly. It's probably the smallest. I don't know for sure, but it's probably the smallest percentage of the stimulation that the FEC has done. Printing their money. The majority of the money that is being printed and given out is going directly to corporations.
Yeah.
Such as the airliners.
Yeah.
The researchers for the virus, Moderna, Inovio, and cruise liners.
Companies like
Boeing.
Ruth's Chris Steakhouse, right? That's I recently read a story about this. They have received $20 million in bailouts, right? And one of the reasoning behind that and why this wealthy nationwide chain has received the bailout as opposed to small one location restaurants is because the system is incredibly backed up, right? The American government doesn't have the logistical capabilities of distributing this money directly, the bailout money, right? So they've left it up to the banks to do this distribution, right? And the banks are incredibly backed up too because they can't employ their full workforce. They can't have everybody come in and work because of the restrictions on working. And so the ability to give this money out is extremely limited. So it's essentially being given out on a first come, first served basis, right? And it's up to individual companies to reach out to banks to get the bailout money that they were promised, right? And the ability of companies to do that is directly related to their wealth, right? How many lawyers they have on retainer, how good those lawyers are, and how many connections they have within governments and within banks, right? So
Yeah.
a wealthy company like Ruth's Chris Steakhouse has more connections, more lawyers, more bankers on file, so they're able to get their $20 million real quick, right? While other restaurants, have one location owned by, a mom and pop, don't have those connections and aren't able to get that money, even though that they're the ones at risk of shutting down as a result of this crisis, as opposed to Ruth's Chris, which is probably going to do a lot better than
Exactly.
Roberto's Taqueria down the street, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the thing to consider is what percentage of the population is actually being affected by the money that's been given. A very, very significant, a very, very small portion of the population is actually getting anything from this. From all the money that that's being printed.
Yeah.
So the way I see the Trump bucks is, don't worry about all the money that we're giving to Carnival, to airlines, to Ruth Chris Steakhouse, as you said. Don't worry about that. Here's $1,200. Shut up about what we're doing with these other corporations.
Yeah.
It's like, what they're trying to do is we're going to give you financial aid in the form of $1,200. First off, $1,200 in California for us.
Yeah.
I have a big family.
Yeah.
That would last us like a day.
Yeah.
Seriously, our operation cost in California is so much higher than the rest of the population.
Yeah.
$1,200 in Mississippi, for instance, might actually do a lot.
Yeah.
But for us, $1,200 is not going to be significant at
Yeah,
all.
I mean, it doesn't even pay rent for most people, right?
Exactly.
Much less all of the costs of living, right?
That's right.
And Secretary of the Treasury, Steve Mnuchin, has said that this $1,200 should last most people 10 weeks, which is baffling to me.
Yeah,
And
it's ridiculous.
Just shows how out of touch the administration is. Oh yeah, 12. How much could a banana cost? 50 cents, right? It should last you 10 weeks, right? Very, very Marie Antoinette-esque, right? Of let them eat cake, right? Here's $1,200 that you should be fine, right? While not actually recognizing how expensive it is to live in America, right?
Yeah.
Rent is extremely expensive. Electricity, water, health insurance, all those things are extremely expensive, and $1,200 doesn't even begin to cover the base necessities that a person needs to live,
Yeah.
right? Much
Meanwhile-
less give them the ability to live the regular life that they were living before the crisis, right?
And meanwhile, right, all these large corporations are receiving billions and billions of dollars, billions of dollars, getting government bails, basically.
Yeah,
And yeah, the $1,200 Trump dollars is basically a shut up.
yeah,
We're giving you some money,
Yeah.
but we're not giving you at all a very significant amount of the money that we're actually printing. So if I were in charge of the distribution of stimulus for the economy, it would go directly to the people who need it the most.
definitely.
These corporations, if they couldn't prepare well enough. Well, first off, let me say this: it's very hard to prepare for something like this. It's very hard to set aside profits.
Yeah,
But it can be done, and that's
and
what
it has been done.
It has been done
has
with
been
Ford,
done.
for instance.
Exactly.
Right? Ford during the 2008 crisis had set aside profits in order for if something drastic happened, like the housing market, housing bubble popping, right? Then they could stay afloat and
Yeah.
not receive government aid.
Yeah.
Right. But all of their relative businesses. Whatever's similar to
Yeah,
Ford,
Fiat, Chrysler, GM,
yep.
all those boys.
They got government bailouts, right? And that should be what happens during these times of crisis: is that the corporations have money set aside for profit, their profits set aside, and they can stay afloat without receiving government aid.
Exactly.
That's how it should be,
Yeah.
but it's not regulated.
Yeah.
No government is saying that you must set aside this portion of your profits. In order, if something drastic happens, like a pandemic, you'll
Yeah.
be able to stay afloat.
Yeah.
But instead, what they've done, if they said, well, we're not going to set aside profits, we're going to keep all our profits, and if something large and drastic happens, the U.S. government is reliant on me for a large portion of laborers that I employ. And so there's this relationship between the corporations and the government that you need me and I need you.
Yeah.
And we work together in this thing. But what is it at the cost of? It's at the cost of the American people.
Yeah.
Because they're not receiving, they're being the ones that are hurt the most by the pandemic, and they're not receiving nearly enough as they should be.
Definitely.
$1,200, 10 weeks? Are you
Yeah.
kidding?
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's ridiculous.
It's super ridiculous.
And like you were saying, because corporations in this country have seen the precedent of when there's a crisis, I'm going to get bailed out. They know, and they know that they've seen that pattern time and time again. Every time a bubble crashes, the government comes in and saves everybody, right? With bailout money, they have no incentive to put aside money like Ford did before the 2008 financial crash, right? There is a established precedent that we don't need to do that, right? We don't need to do that. We're going to be fine because we've seen time and time again that the government comes in and saves our assets, right? So why should we put aside our profits and make our stockholders a little bit less happy by not paying out massive dividends to them every quarter, right? We're just going to, give all of our profits to our owners to keep them happy and not put aside any money at all because we've seen the precedent that we're going to get saved, right? So the reason why companies don't put aside this crisis money, they don't have a fund to go back on in a time of crisis or in the time of an economic downturn, is because there's an established precedent that the American federal government will come and bail them out, right?
Definitely. And another thing to mention is what does the actual loan look like? What does the loan actually look like?
Yeah.
Well, it's nearly a 0% interest rate.
Yeah.
Very nearly 0% interest rate. You receive this money, and it's basically just there's really no strings attached.
Yeah.
To the bailouts.
Yeah, and I mean, this time they attached some congressional oversight that if you receive these loans, you can't
Give executive bonuses.
yeah, or no, not executive bonuses. They still allow that, but no stock buybacks.
Really, no
Yeah,
stock buybacks.
for the term of the loan plus 1 year, right? Which is a step in the right direction. But once again, the American government doesn't have the logistical capacity to monitor every single company that engages in these loans, right?
Yeah.
We don't have the capability to monitor every single company that has received a loan or received a bailout in order to make sure that they're spending that money the right way. And so I think that, like you were saying before, this money should be going to the American people, the people that are suffering the most as a result of this pandemic. And I think that the best model for that is looking at how European countries are spending their bailouts. They are giving money directly to the employees that would be laid off as a result of this crisis, right? So let's take the UK, for example. A massive amount of people have been laid off as a result of the crisis in the UK, right? And the government bailout is not going to companies themselves and allowing the companies to spend that money, upon their own discretion. That money is going directly to the people that were laid off, right? So the government is paying 80% of the wages that you received prior to being laid off, right? So that money is being paid directly from the government to the people that were laid off, so that those people are maintained on furlough, and that those people can go right back to work after the crisis is over, and that they basically have a safety net to catch them when they fall, right? So that money isn't being given directly to corporations, right? It's up to the corporations to maintain, their financial solvency, right? Where they it's up to you to stay afloat, right? Continue to pay your rent, continue to maintain your logistical infrastructure to stay alive as a company. But we'll pay your employees, right? So you don't have to worry about that, and that way, those employees that would be laid off instead receive their wages, right? Which ultimately allows those people to keep spending in the economy, continue to put money back into the economy, and keep boosting the economy without putting money into the pockets of the owners of the country.
And so labor would be the greatest expense of a company? Did you say that?
That's usually the model, right? That's usually the biggest expense. I mean, for certain companies like pharmaceutical research companies, it's R&D that's the biggest cost, right? You have to have lots of facilities, right, and relatively low amount of laborers, right? But for most companies, labor is the biggest cost. So if we take that cost off your back, right, we make sure that those people continue to receive their wage, or 80% of it, right? They're not paying full wages, but 80% of those wages, which should be enough to keep those people afloat, right? And then it's up to the company to deal with the rest of the company, essentially. Everything that's not labor, everything that's not wages, it's your job to keep that afloat. And then that will set the precedent of companies needing to have a crisis fund. They need to be ready for this sort of thing when it comes the next time, because this is not the last crisis we're going to face.
No, and it's not. I'm a firm believer that we're at the highest point right now with our economy being stimulated. Like, I'm a firm believer that maybe next month, maybe June or July, everything is going to go to shit very quickly.
Yeah.
The economy is going to severely crash. I believe that the labor that we have right now currently is significantly low because everyone has to stay at home.
Yeah.
And the prices of everything of all the stocks and of all the companies are overvalued.
As a result of the stimulus, right?
As a result of the stimulus, because what I've been looking at in the stock market recently is that everything's up. Everything is green. Although they're not earning anything. They're not bringing in any money. It's artificial.
Yeah.
The only thing that's keeping them afloat is the government bailouts.
Yeah. It's a bubble.
It is a massive bubble.
And when that bubble pops, the people that are going to suffer as a result of it are the workers, the American people, right? And I mean, we could like to imagine that the government could continue to spend trillions of dollars every single month to keep these companies afloat.
But that's where inflation comes in.
That's where inflation comes in, and the American middle class are going to get hurt significantly. All of their savings are going to get tanked, right? So there's no real way out of this predicament without someone being hurt, right? And to me, we're really at a crossroads here of we can either choose to save the owners, save the companies themselves, prop up the stockholders, or we can choose to save the workers, right? Save the American people, the people that work for $12 an hour, and all of a sudden with that rug pulled out from under them, they can't pay their rent, they can't buy groceries, they can't feed their family, right? So we have a choice to make, right? And it seems like our government right now is choosing to prop up stockholders, to prop up owners, to prop up corporate interests, as opposed to the American people who are going to be suffering at a much higher level. Because I mean, let's think about it from a utilitarian perspective, right? Let's take Ruth's Chris Steakhouse, for example, right? National chain, employs a lot of people.
Great steaks too.
Great steaks, right? I've never been there, but I know
I've
you
been there
have, right?
twice.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness,
It's
it's
expensive though, right?
It's so expensive.
Yeah,
it's just like if ever there was a you know when you eat really good food.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go off on a little tangent.
Yeah.
You know when you eat really good food, you're
Yeah.
like, I don't know how this could get better.
Yeah.
Right? You know, like where is up from here?
Exactly,
You know?
exactly.
That's Ruth Chris Steakhouse.
Yeah,
For me. It's
yeah,
like
yeah.
you get a $60 steak that's dry aged.
Yeah.
That is perfectly cooked.
Yeah.
And you get the scalloped potatoes.
Ooh.
You know, and maybe some like side asparagus
Yeah.
or something like that.
The whole restaurant's real fancy.
That's right. Yeah. And oh man, it was. I've been there twice, and each time I went there for my birthday twice, and oh my goodness, it's just it's one of those out of body experiences.
Yeah.
Where it's like, how can food get better than this?
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
Anyways.
Anyways, right? Now we're gonna trash it.
Go ahead and trash it. I
Exactly.
just want to say great steaks.
Yeah. But so they got $20 million as a result of this bailout, right? And they got that money ahead of, or before other restaurants that will be impacted more than
Small
businesses, right?
So let's think about how much good that $20 million could have done, right?
If that $20 million could have been put into food banks, right? Institutions whose job it is to feed people that don't have food, right? Imagine how many people we could feed for $20 million, right? We could relieve entire cities from the plague of hunger that is rapidly approaching, right? Entire states, right? We could pay the rent for people that have been laid off, right? We could, take homeless people off the street and put them into housing that's empty right now. I mean, we could do so much good with that money that would massively benefit so many more people than it currently benefits when that money is going to Ruth's Chris Steakhouse. And that's just one example of one restaurant chain, right? And once you multiply that by billions and billions of dollars, right, that almost $2 trillion is being given to these massive corporations, that money could do so much good. It could relieve almost all of the financial suffering of the American people that is going to be brought about by this crisis. Yet instead, we're choosing to give it to the owners who will not materially suffer nearly as much as a result of this crisis. If your wealth gets halved from $4 billion to $2 billion, your material quality of life
is practically
the same, right? You can still go to Martha's Vineyard every summer. Your kids are still going to private school, right? You still have this $4 million house, right? Your material quality of life is not going to change nearly as much as the person who went from making $200 a week to making $0 a week.
Yeah, that's capital.
Right.
Capital makes more capital.
Yeah.
So if you have $2 million, you're set for life.
Yeah.
People, I don't know, if people really truly understand this, but if you have $1 million, you are set for life.
Right.
Capital will create more capital.
Yeah, exactly.
It's as simple as that.
Yeah.
And so we've been talking millions, we've been talking billions, we've been talking trillions.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
what is actually the difference between a million and a trillion? Well, I have this. I'll just read it.
Yeah, go ahead.
1 million seconds is 12 days. 1 billion seconds is 31 years. 1 trillion seconds is 31,688 years.
Jeez.
So when we're throwing around these million, billions, and trillions,
Yeah.
it's very, very hard for you to wrap your head around.
Yeah.
Right? But the difference between 1 million seconds and 1 trillion seconds, right, is 12 days, million, and 31,688 years.
That's
so
insane.
we've dumped 5 trillion into the economy currently,
Yeah.
right? It's just mind blowing.
Yeah.
The amount of 5 trillion.
Yeah. That's insane.
It's insane. 31 days and 31 years,
Yeah.
billion, and
Yeah.
31,000 years
That's insane.
is a trillion.
Yeah.
So just thought I'd share that.
Yeah.
It's really hard to get, because you say million, billion, trillion, and it doesn't really have that significant of an impact. You're like,
Yeah.
well, a billion's a lot more than a million.
Yeah.
And a billion's a lot more than a trillion.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Or, I mean, a trillion's a lot more than a billion.
Yeah.
But you don't actually have the real numbers
Yeah.
behind it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You can't really conceptualize it
Yeah,
because it's so much money,
right?
It's so
It's
much.
more money than we've ever touched or seen in our whole lives, right?
Yeah.
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 Yeah, it's nuts. But yeah, back to Trump.
Back to Trump.
Back to Trump.
Back to Trump. We'll
Little-
get to
little
him
half an hour tangent, right?
But yeah, so we've seen that Trump has consistently undermined the threat, right? Called it a Democratic hoax. It's going to be over. We're going to be opened up by Easter, right? 100,000 deaths. It's not that bad. We're on top of it, right?
Yeah, it's tremendous.
And my argument is that has made his base and people that believe in Trump less susceptible to reacting strongly, right? Because when they hear that it's a Democratic hoax, right, they're likely to group it up with the other things that have been called Democratic hoax, like the Russia investigations and all of the countless things that the Democrats have attacked Trump with, right, which they believe are unwarranted and not real threats, right? And that is backed up by real statistics, right? So when polled, whether and asked whether coronavirus or COVID-19 is a serious issue, 59% of Democrats said yes, it's a serious issue, right? So almost 2/3, right? And then if you compare that to Republicans, only 33% of Republicans said that it was a serious issue, right? So there's a significant gap between Republicans and Democrats in terms of considering it a serious issue or not, right? And I believe that stems from, you could say that it stems from Donald Trump himself and his rhetoric, but I think it also stems from the general lack of respect for science that the Republican Party has demonstrated over the past 20, 30 years, right? And general disrespect for science and general disrespect for the scientific consensus of the American, scientific community, right? And a general less willingness to trust the institutions that are in power, right?
Sure.
Democrats are more likely to trust the federal government than Republicans, right?
Yeah, so you could say, 59%, right, Democrats. Yeah. You could say about half of Democrats, just doing estimations, a little bit over half believe that coronavirus is a real threat, and only 1/3 of Republicans actually believe that it's a real threat.
Yeah.
And that's... and the reason why can probably be attributed to Trump's verbal language to an extent. I mean, because calling it a Democratic hoax will definitely make people believe that the threat is not as severe as it is. Definitely. Is the threat severe? Let's just get that out of the way real quick. The threat is very severe.
Severe, right? Yeah.
Very, very severe.
Right. I think at this point, over 14,000 people have died in New York alone, right?
Yeah.
Their morgues are full. They're making mass graves in
Central
Park, right?
Park.
If that isn't a serious enough threat, I don't know what is, right?
Yeah.
It feels like we're in end times here,
it feels like Armageddon.
Yeah, exactly. It feels insane, right?
Yeah.
But because Trump is telling his base not to worry about it, it'll be over by Easter, and Easter has passed. It's not over.
It's
right?
definitely not over.
It's definitely not over, and in fact, I feel like the threat is only increasing at this point. But
the thing is that
the attitude of the different political leanings of our country has a direct impact on their response in their reaction and response to the virus, right? It's not just that Republicans say it's not a serious issue and then act the same way that Democrats act, right? A company called Unicast basically is a company that tracks GPS movement through the use of restaurant finding apps, right, in America, right? So they have their app downloaded on a bunch of people's phones all across America, and that allows them to track the general movement of the American people, right? And so they decided to look at the general decrease of movement as a result of the coronavirus, right? So they compared the amount of movement from February 28th to March 27th, right? Which is, the difference between when the coronavirus was just kicking up to when it was almost in full swing, right? Now it's gotten worse since March 27th, but it was a good comparison point of, how movement has changed within that month, right? And the national average of a decrease in movement is 30%, right? So on average, we decreased our amount of
by
movement by 30%.
That's very substantial.
Very substantial. Not quite 100%, which is what we're aiming for, but it did decrease,
Yeah.
right? But then once you look at the partisan differences within that movement, you can really find some interesting data, right? So if you look at all of the states that decreased their movement by above 44%, all of them are Democratic. All of them voted for Hillary Clinton in 2016, right? And then if you look at all of the ones that decreased their movement by less than 29%, all but 3 of them were Republican states, right? States that voted for Trump in 2016, right? So there's a direct correlation between states that voted for Trump and states that react less to coronavirus.
Well, I got a few questions about
Yeah,
that
yeah.
statistic because it doesn't seem like it's very valid, right? Because there could be, there's a lot of, I forget what the word is, but basically things that mess up the statistic, right? So first off, you'd have to show that the Democrats and the Republicans equally turn on location services, right? So that allows the app to track your phone, right? So there could be the fact that Democrats are more likely to turn on location services and Republicans are a lot less likely to turn on location services.
Yeah.
And so that could be the disparity right there.
Yeah, I mean,
And you'd also have to consider the fact that how many of those people that are traveling that are traveling are only doing it by car, because you're assuming the assumption within the question is the traveling is they're going to public gatherings, right? But it could be that they're traveling in their car, just going to a drive-through, for instance, or going from going over to a friend's house like you're doing right now, which is just a one person. But the assumption is that it's assumed within the question that since Republicans are traveling a lot more, that
or they've decreased their travel time by less than Democrats.
that's right. They've decreased travel time by less than Democrats, and they're still traveling, right? The assumption is, well, it's because they think the virus is less severe, which, if that statistic you brought up first is true, then yes. But it's kind of assumed in the question that they're actually going to a public gathering and spreading the virus.
Yeah, yeah, and that's not necessarily what I'm applying. I'm not saying that all these Republicans are going to church where they're sitting in a chapel with 100 other people, even though a lot of them are, right? But I think that it's just important to look at that these are just pure movement numbers, right? You brought up some valid points, right? Now, I think that the amount of Democrats versus Republicans that turn on their location data is not necessarily relevant to this question, right? Because it's just taking an average of all of the people in the state, right? And correlating that state number with whether that state is a Republican state or Democratic state by their vote in 2016, right? And if only, let's say 30% of Californians turn on their location data as opposed to 1% of the people in Wyoming, that data is still extrapolated the same way, right? Now, you may get a better or worse representation of the data by the amount of people that turn on location services. But ultimately, I don't think that there is a strong partisan divide between people that turn on or don't turn on their location
and again,
services,
this is
right?
only correlation. You cannot determine the causation by correlation.
Yeah. Oh, definitely not. Right.
And so you can only take shots.
Right.
About what it possibly could be.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah.
But and the thing is that this data is not only correlated at the state level; it's also correlated at the county level. Right, so this group looked at counties in Florida, right, which is a swing state in the 2016 election. Counties that were won by Trump had once again a lower decrease in movement from those two dates than counties that were won by Hillary Clinton, right? So the Miami-Dade County, right, which is where Miami is obviously, had a decrease of around 40% in movement, right? And then if you compare that to the county where Fort Lauderdale is, in the northern part of Florida, that decrease was only 25%, right? So even within states, there is a difference in the decrease in movement based on partisan lines, right? And there's other things that you can point to. You could say that Trump has more rural voters, and rural voters are less likely to or, they have to travel more, right? Because when you live far away from everything, you have to travel a little bit
Yeah,
more, right?
absolutely.
And I mean, that's you can look at Wyoming as a specific case for that. Wyoming has actually increased movement by 30% from those 2 dates, right?
Yeah. But I
which-
mean, how many people live in Wyoming? It's
not
like,
much, right?
Not much at
Not
all.
much, right? And because
San Diego's probably has a higher population than all of Wyoming.
Yeah, exactly.
LA definitely does.
Yeah, exactly. And you could say that because Wyoming is such a rural state, the coronavirus doesn't matter as much, right? Everyone lives far apart. The chance for infection is already much lower than take New York, for example, where you have millions of
They're
people.
seriously stacked on top of each other.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like they're
literally
literally stacked on top of
Yeah,
each other.
exactly.
There's
As
no
opposed to
escape.
Wyoming, where there's 4 miles between
Yeah.
every single person, right? So yeah, there are differences there, but I think that it's important to look at how Trump's rhetoric affects the reaction to the reaction of his base.
So that's where you think the causation is.
I mean, I think that it's not the only source, obviously, right? Like I said before, Republicans are less likely to trust science, right, and less likely to listen to the scientific consensus of American scientific institutions, which might be one serious reason for not respecting this scientific consensus of don't leave your house, like don't do that, right? But I think it's important when looking at the reaction of Trump voters and the Trump base to coronavirus and the restrictions placed on their lives. I think it's important to look at what happened in the capital of Michigan a couple of days ago, right? There was a massive rally of people that took their cars and parked them on the street in front of the State House and held a rally, an anti-coronavirus restriction rally, which is basically, to me, it's a pro-coronavirus rally of everybody getting together in front of the State House, waving Confederate
That's
flags,
hilarious.
yelling at the Democratic governor, saying, "We want to go back to work," right? And if you look at the insignia of these people, overwhelmingly Trump supporters. I mean, almost all of the flags that were being flown were Trump-Pence flags or Confederate flags, right? So to me, that is Trump's base, right?
Michigan?
In Michigan, right? I mean,
Michigan voted Democrat, though, didn't they?
yeah, in this last election, right? But there are still Trump supporters in Michigan,
Yeah,
right?
okay,
We
yeah.
can agree on that, right? And they actually parked their cars on the boulevard in front of the State House, which is also blocking a hospital, right? Which made it so that the ambulances coming in and out of that hospital weren't able to function, right? So ambulances weren't able to get out and they weren't able to get into the hospital. So not only were they increasing the chances for spreading coronavirus by simply gathering in a large group in front of the State House, but they were also hindering the treatment of coronavirus patients by blocking hospital entrances with their cars, right? So to me, that's a blatant example of the Trump base reacting in a way that is directly against their own interests and the interests of the American people's health in general, right? I mean, obviously not the American people as a whole, right? But the people of Lansing, Missouri, right? Michigan.
Yeah, I don't like Michigan. Michigan's
Yeah.
probably my least favorite state.
Really?
Yeah.
Why is that?
Really for no particular reason.
Yeah.
I've heard a lot of bad things about
Yeah,
Michigan.
yeah.
I've never been either. I just
Yeah.
don't like Michigan.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's kind of a weird.
Yeah, and I mean, it's okay. It's
Hate
okay.
Michigan.
Yeah, it's okay. It's okay. But I mean, can you recognize that, or not recognize, but can you acknowledge that it seems like these people were emboldened by Trump's rhetoric to make actions in protest against the Democratic governor of Michigan because Trump said this is a Democratic hoax. The Democrats are the ones that are restricting your ability to go to work. They're the ones that are putting all these restrictions on you. That emboldened the Trump base in Michigan to go into the streets, to block off boulevards with their cars, and to spread the coronavirus and hinder the treatment of coronavirus patients.
Yeah, I'm not going to defend their actions.
Yeah,
That's
okay,
for sure.
okay,
I mean,
okay,
it sounds like no, I support them blocking
just
ambulances.
anti-science,
Yeah, well, but-
anti-logic,
yeah.
anti-reason, right? And
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
and also, when you're flying a Confederate flag in Michigan, you're a racist. I mean, I don't know what else to say.
You're flying a Confederate flag anywhere.
Yeah, anywhere really. I mean, when you fly it in Alabama, there's some way of saying it's my heritage, right? I like the South. I'm Southern,
Yeah.
and this symbol represents me in the South, right?
Sure.
still very racist.
Still very racist.
Still very racist. But when you're flying it in Michigan, which is one of the Union states, like you're just
Yeah.
blatantly saying, "I'm a racist.
Sure.
I support slavery. I support the Confederacy." Right?
This is my only, kind of gripe, right?
Yeah.
Is that to put the blame
Yeah.
on Trump
Right.
for this
Right.
is not valid.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
not valid because you can't determine how much of those people went out and protested purely because Trump has his task force meetings and might have said a few concerning things.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
To put it lightly.
To put it lightly,
Yeah.
concerning things. But granted, he's showing his face every single day. Well, not every single day, but the majority of days. He's going in front of the telly and is telling the people that this is what we're doing.
Yeah, yeah,
Here are the steps that we're taking in order to try and combat the coronavirus. And when you're in front of the screen, like, when we're doing our podcast, we say dumb shit all the time. All the time. And we look back on it like, I can't believe I said that.
Right. Right.
And it's kind of hypocritical of us to say, well, I can't believe Donald Trump said that.
Yeah.
He's in front of the screen. He's
Yeah.
trying to, save a few points.
Yeah,
such as federal supremacy.
Yeah.
I have total authority.
Yeah, yeah.
We'll get to that.
Yeah.
But you gotta think, he's in front of the screen. He's really trying to do his best. And, no one told him that he has to have a task force meeting every single day where he goes up and talks for an hour about what's going on and takes questions and answers the questions to the best visibility. And he's going to say dumb things.
Yeah.
And he's going to say things that he doesn't mean. And so, and I'm trying to declare intent.
Yeah.
Right? That's what I'm really trying to do.
Right.
He's not intending it to be perceived that way. He's
Right.
not intending it to be
Right.
perceived. But again, I can't.
It's impossible.
It's
right?
impossible to determine
Neither
intent.
of us are sitting in his mind, right?
That's right.
Um,
We can't declare intent.
Yeah.
But can you at least see that since he's on screen
Definitely.
every single day
Yeah.
for an hour, he's gonna say
he's
dumb
bound
shit.
to make some mistakes, right?
I mean,
I
you could just
definitely-
listen through any one of our podcasts.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
At the end of it, we'll be like,
you
"We're
take little
sorry
clips.
about saying this."
Yeah, exactly. You take little clips out. You're gonna find some dumb stuff.
You're gonna
yourself.
find some dumb stuff,
right? But obviously there is a difference between our podcast that has 20 listeners, right, and
And
the
president
pulpit
the
of the
United
presidency, right?
Yeah.
Right. But I think that he should be more cautious about his words, right? And I think this is I'm going to use this to transition into another direct negative impact of his words. Now, you can say it's not as direct, but his use of anti-China rhetoric has resulted in an increase in xenophobic attitude and actions here in America, right? That not only impacts Chinese Americans, but Asian Americans as a whole, right?
Yeah.
There have been a massive increase in reports of hate crimes and hate speech against Asian Americans, especially in LA, right? I've seen videos of people, breaking the cars of Korean Americans, right? Just smashing the windows of Korean Americans just because they're Korean Americans, right? People vandalizing the stores of Asian Americans, right? People yelling racial slurs at Asian Americans they see in stores, right? Wearing hats that say racial slurs directed at Asian Americans, right? And I think that now obviously racism is a reaction that a lot of Americans have in terms of a crisis. It's something for them to fall back on, and it's
Yeah.
easy for them to do, right? It's
You
easy
can
to
look
be
throughout
racist,
history
right?
of America and just
we,
fine.
We jump to racism very quickly,
Yeah,
right? Which is a bad thing, and is something we should curtail and try to work
Oh
against.
yeah, we do curtail and we try and work.
We try
against it.
to, right? But
Yeah.
when our president is standing in front of the national media calling something a Chinese virus, and his advisors that are working in the White House are calling it the Kung flu.
They did not say that, by the
They
way.
did.
No,
They
they did
did
not.
say the
They
Kung
did not.
flu.
No,
They
no,
did
no,
say
no,
the
they
Kung
did
flu.
not.
Yeah.
I read the report on that.
Yeah?
No, they weren't calling it the Kung flu.
Okay, so where did that report come from? Okay,
And again, it doesn't even matter.
Let's not get into the semantics.
Sure,
right?
sure.
But do you think that by attaching this pandemic to race, it emboldens people to be racist throughout America, right?
Yeah,
Right?
of course.
Right.
Obviously.
So do you think that is something
that the Trump administration is to blame for by standing on the national pulpit, standing in front of the national media, and calling it the Chinese virus, the Wuhan virus. Fox News included, they call it the Wuhan virus in almost every single news segment instead of saying COVID-19, which has no racial implications at all. But
They say coronavirus.
no, I've seen plenty of headlines where they say Wuhan virus, right, which immediately ties the virus and the pain that people are suffering to China and the Chinese people living here in America.
So are
right?
you saying it's not valid to call it the Wuhan virus?
I mean, it's from Wuhan, right? That's where it came from, and it came from China, right? But I think that by calling it that and attaching it to China and Chinese people, you are emboldening people to make racist actions and spew hate speech against Chinese Americans here in America. And also,
I think you're taking a leap.
What purpose does it serve? Right?
Again, no purpose. But I'm not defending calling it the Kung Flu because I didn't think that's what happened.
Yeah,
But I mean, calling it the Wuhan virus.
Right.
Is that invalid? Is it wrong?
Yeah.
You think it's wrong?
I think because of the negative connotation that it attaches with Chinese people here in America and Asian people in general, not just Chinese people, Koreans, Japanese people, because of the negative impact of that rhetoric, we should avoid that rhetoric, right? Now, is it accurate? Is it from China? Yeah.
Yeah,
right?
then that's it. That's just it. It's accurate.
That's it, right? But
so we should change
it. It has a negative impact, right?
Sure.
Can we acknowledge that, right? That
calling something the Wuhan virus's negative impact. Well, I don't know if it's demonstrable, if it's demonstrable that calling something the Wuhan virus being that it is accurate. First off, actually emboldens people to commit racial crimes. Like,
right.
I think that's quite a leap. As you're saying.
So where did the rise in racial hatred against Asian Americans come from? Where did that stem from? Because if you compare the amount of racial hatred and the racial hate speech coming from Americans going against Asian Americans, if you compare it to now and compared to the same time last year, it's increased significantly.
Yeah, well, that's because the virus came from China, right? And
Mm-hmm.
people and the people in America are saying, well, if it came from China, they're making the assumption that everyone who's Chinese American in America are infected, right? And so that's where the racial is coming from.
Yeah.
But to say that we should stop calling it the Wuhan virus because it somehow emboldens racists to be racist against Chinese American, I think is inaccurate. Because what you're trying to do is you're trying to say, although it did come from Wuhan, we should try and change the name. And again, there's nothing wrong with saying coronavirus. Like,
yeah, exactly, because it has no racial connotation. It has a name. It's called COVID-19. Why call it the Wuhan virus? And
because it came from Wuhan.
I think it's important at this point to look back in history at the use of attaching, or how the American empire has attached race and nationality to disease in order to further propaganda and general negative attitudes towards a certain geopolitical enemy, right? And I want to take it back to the Spanish flu, right? Another famous disease that swept through America and the world as a whole, and why it was called the Spanish flu. It wasn't from Spain. The first cases that were reported were in the American Midwest, in Iowa and Illinois, right? It came from America, right? But by calling it the Spanish flu, the American government and the American establishment as a whole were able to drum up anti-Spanish attitudes going into the American-Spanish War, right? The American-Spanish War was already kicking off, and the American Empire had its eyes set on Spanish colonies in the Caribbean, Puerto Rico and Cuba, right? They wanted to go to war with Spain, and so in order to boost popular support for that war, they associated with the disease that was hurting the American people with Spain, right? So simply by attaching Spain to this disease, they were able to drum up support for anti-Spanish actions, right? And we went to war. We won that war, and we took those colonies, and we still own Puerto Rico, right? So I think it's important to look at the use and the utility of attaching race and nationality to a disease that has no nationality, right? The virus is not Chinese. It came from China, right? But it's a virus. It has no ethnicity. It has no nationality. But by attaching it to a nationality and attaching it to an ethnicity, it furthers the American establishment's geopolitical objectives of turning the American people against China, so that therefore any action against China would be justified. If all of the American people hate China vehemently and blame China for the disease and blame China for the suffering of the American people, they're much more willing to engage in military action against China, right? So that way, next time American warships are engaging in war games in the South China Sea that could potentially cause a war against China, the American people are much more willing to support that and won't be willing to vote out, politicians that support that kind of action, right?
Yeah,
So it furthers the geopolitical objectives of the American establishment and brings us closer to war with China, which we can both agree is a negative outcome. We don't want war with China, and therefore making the American people
dislike
anti-Chinese is a bad thing, right?
Sure.
It brings us closer to that war, which will hurt America and it will hurt China, and so we want to avoid that. And by calling the disease the Chinese disease, we're furthering that step. We're getting a step closer to war with China, which is a bad thing. So let's just call it what it is: the coronavirus or COVID-19.
All the headlines that I've seen on Fox News have been coronavirus.
Okay, right.
Fox News articles, right? But when I see clips of Tucker Carlson or Sean Hannity, the script at the bottom of the screen says Wuhan virus, right? Now, I'm sure there's some disparity. Different shows have different headlines, right?
Sure, I don't know if it's intentional.
And it might not be intentional, right? It might just be some staffer that likes to call it that. It's more sensationalized. It's easier to call it a proper noun as opposed to a boring scientific term like COVID-19. But I think it's important to recognize the negative implications of attaching race and nationality to the virus that has negative impacts against Asian Americans here in America, and it furthers the American geopolitical objectives of war with China, which are detrimental to the Chinese and the American people.
Well, what you're assuming, right? Because you have a few assumptions in there.
Yeah, lots of assumptions. I'm making
You
an
got a
argument.
ton. You got a ton of assumptions. And your first assumption that I noticed was that you're attaching the racial uprising in America against Chinese to the
Asian Americans as a whole.
Yeah, well, because
Americans-
people don't
Americans
distinguish
aren't that good.
Koreans
Yeah,
and
yeah,
Chinese.
yeah.
They don't make the distinction that people from Korea aren't from China.
Hey, don't yell at him, bro. He's Korean.
He's
Like,
Korean. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
It's because they all look the same. dog. I'm kidding. What was it? Oh, yeah. So, okay.
What are my assumptions here? Yeah.
Your first assumption is that the uprising against Chinese Americans in America is because of Fox News calling it the Wuhan virus.
Not
instead of
just Fox
coronavirus.
News. I'm not placing the blame purely on Fox News and purely on Trump, right? But I think that their rhetoric emboldens that kind of action, right? I'm sure that there's some uncle in your family, right? And I'm saying you, the royal you, right? Not you, Gabe, right?
Sure.
So when you got some uncle railing against the Chinese people, all these stupid chinks, right? They brought this virus to our country, right? That also emboldens you, right? So that uncle's also to blame, right? And, Facebook posters reposting racist memes, also to blame, right? But as an institution with power, right? Fox News is the most watched news source in all of America. Trump has the pulpit of the presidency. He has the most important position in America. They need to be held to a higher standard because of their spread and because of their reach, right? You and me, we have 20 people that listen to this podcast. Like, what we say doesn't have that much of an impact, right?
Yes.
But when you are the most watched news source in America, you need to be held to a higher standard because your words have a significantly greater impact on the psyche of the American people, right? So I think that it's important to hold the people in power to a higher standard than just individual people that are being racist on the street. Now, fuck those individual racists, obviously,
Yes,
right?
obviously.
But I think that it's important to recognize that those people in power, their rhetoric has a negative impact on the American people and Asian Americans living in America. Now, are they solely to blame? No. But I think that it's easier to point out those in power and act against them and get them to shape up than it is to point out all of the individuals in America that are furthering that racism.
Yeah. So the first assumption.
Yeah.
Give me my assumptions.
All right. So you're assuming first that the Wuhan virus, by calling it the Wuhan virus, sparks racism. And I don't know if you can demonstrate that it does spark racism. And also you made the connection with the Spanish flu. Well, the Spanish flu was inaccurate. Calling it the Spanish flu was inaccurate, and it was a geopolitical weapon. Right, calling it the Spanish flu to embolden people in the United States to be more willing to accept the the empire of America
Yeah.
by spreading to the Philippines and
Yeah.
wherever,
Yeah.
Puerto Rico,
Yeah.
Cuba to an extent.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what that was wholly inaccurate, right? Calling it the Spanish flu, it didn't come from Spain; it came from America. Well, is it inaccurate to call it the Wuhan virus?
Technically, no.
Technically,
It
no.
did come from
And so
Wuhan.
it is 100% accurate. Now, should we not call it the Wuhan virus because it has the possibility, which you can't demonstrate, of sparking racism? I don't think you should. And I'm not advocating continuing to call it the Wuhan virus. I just don't see that calling it the Wuhan virus and calling it coronavirus has... I don't see that you can demonstrate that the Wuhan virus and coronavirus, calling it by those two separate names, one doesn't spark racism and one does spark racism.
Yeah.
Okay, and first off, I'm sure the majority of Americans couldn't point out Wuhan on a map,
Yeah. Definitely.
right? And so I'm sure the people aren't saying, "Oh, Wuhan, that's in the southern region of China, right? Southern region,
It's right in the middle.
right in the middle."
It's like smack dab.
See,
right
I
in the middle
can't
of China. Yeah.
Yeah, so
It's in Hubei.
yeah. Well, yeah, you've probably been to Wuhan, huh? No, you haven't.
But I lived with a family that was from Wuhan.
Yeah, okay. But they're not associating Wuhan in China. Well, maybe they are.
I think they are.
You think they are?
Yeah.
Well, okay, but
When you say Osaka, people won't be able to point out where Osaka is on the map, but they know it's in Japan.
Yeah.
Or when you say Toulouse, people know it's in France, right? They don't know where it is on the map. Or when you say Milan, people know it's Italy, right? I don't know.
people aren't that smart, man.
Americans are ignorant. We agree on that, right?
That's for sure.
They can't point out Wuhan on a map.
Yeah,
But-
but again,
but-
my main point is
Yeah,
just
yeah,
this.
go ahead,
My
go
main
ahead.
point is simply this: is
Yeah.
that I think you're attributing racism in America against Chinese Americans to the using of the word Wuhan virus instead of coronavirus, and I don't think you can demonstrate that that's the reason.
Right.
Um,
It's not the only reason.
No, and it possibly is a factor, but
Right.
you'd have to show that it is a factor.
Yeah.
And you're making, and the assumption is that the racists were somehow emboldened by taking action because they heard the word Wuhan virus. And again, it's not inaccurate. It came from Wuhan, or at least that's where we think it originated.
Right.
Patient 0 came from Wuhan.
Right. But I kind of want to move off this topic because we've talked about it for a while now, right? But
Yeah.
I generally think there's no upside to calling it the Wuhan virus, right? There's no upside at all. It doesn't matter where this virus came from, whether it came from Nairobi or it came from Istanbul or it came from Malmö, right? It doesn't matter. It's here and it's hurting American lives, right? And by calling it the Wuhan virus, you're right. I'm not able to prove a direct correlation between Fox News calling it a Wuhan virus and racial hatred against Asian Americans, right? And part of that is because I'm white. I'm not an Asian American, and therefore I'm not one of the people that is experiencing this racism, right? So I think we would need to bring in an Asian American and have them speak directly on the increase of racial hatred that they might have felt as a result of this coronavirus, right? But once again, I've read stories, I've seen articles of an increase in racial hatred against Asian Americans, right? And I think that we agree that's a bad thing, right? When someone breaks the windows of a Korean guy's car just because he's Korean, that's bad, right? So eliminating all of the things that might have led to that racial attack is a good step, right? So even if it's impossible to prove a direct correlation between the Fox News calling it the Wuhan virus and a Fox News listener or watcher going out and smashing up some car, it's almost impossible to prove that direct correlation. But can we agree that it could have some impact on that, and it could lead to an increase in racial hatred? And even if it's 1%,
Could is the key word.
even if it's 1%, right?
Yeah.
That it's just one of many factors that led to that racial attack. It has no benefit, right? There's no upside to calling it the Wuhan virus, and it potentially has a downside, right? It might not be provable, but it does have a downside, right? Even if it's just one racial attack from one person in America, that's bad, and it has no upside, so we should avoid it.
Yeah, in the Great Potato Famine of Ireland,
Yeah.
26 million people died.
Yeah.
And where did they come?
Yeah.
They fled to America.
Yep.
Right? And when they came to America, they had a very tough time because there was an association with Irish people being drunks. And so that's what led to the 18th Amendment? 18th? I can't remember, 18, 19,
Yeah.
of basically just banning alcohol.
Mm.
And 2 amendments later, 3 amendments later, we said, all right, alcohol's fine.
Yeah.
But yeah, when the Irish came, they faced religious, or not religious. Well, they were Catholic, but they faced persecution, right? Because there was an association with them being drunkards and drunk people hurting society.
Yeah.
Right. That's the same association that's happening today.
Yeah.
That Chinese Americans are somehow all infected, right? Because
it came from China.
Because it came from China.
Right.
Right. And is that the correct association? Absolutely not.
Right.
You know, I'm sure that Chinese Americans and you know, Irish or, you know, German, whatever you want to call them, white people in America have the equal chance of getting infected.
Oh yeah.
Right. Obviously. And to make that association that we should start smashing Chinese Americans' cars and saying go back to China, like that's obviously not good for anyone.
Yeah.
And of course, America's had this pattern pattern of jumping, you know, like with the almost concentration camps of Japanese Americans during the World War II. You know, we make the assumption that
we scapegoat racial minorities very easily.
Very easily.
Right?
Very
When we
easily.
face a problem, we
It's
point
their
a
fault.
finger, right?
Yeah.
White America finds a minority that's they blame and they attack them, right?
Yeah, and obviously they're not good.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think we touched all the good points. I just my only concern with what you're arguing is that by saying it's the Wuhan virus is somehow wrong, and I don't know if it is or it isn't.
Yeah, I mean, it came from Wuhan. I'm not trying to argue that point,
yeah.
but I'm just saying there's no point in calling it the Wuhan virus
just call it
just because
coronavirus.
it potentially has this negative impact.
I'm on board with that too. Like, what's the problem with coronavirus?
Yeah.
COVID-19.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Scientific, it has no racial implications. Doesn't attach any nationality to the virus.
At this point,
We've touched on it.
yeah.
We've touched
At
on
this
it. Yeah,
point,
yeah.
the whole. I think Denmark is the only country that's not infected.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
a global
Greenland.
crisis. Or Greenland.
Greenland. They had like one case.
He got better.
Got better. We get
Just like the simulation. right?
Exactly,
The
exactly.
Plague
Plague
Inc.
Inc. Yeah. It also helps that there's like 3 cities in Denmark or in Greenland, and each of them have 10 people. So it's easy just to avoid the other 9 people
Yeah.
in your city. Just
Yeah,
stay
yeah.
in your house.
Yeah. It's
And
also cold up there too.
Exactly,
You
exactly.
don't know,
They are set. They are chilling.
they're chilling.
Um,
But yeah, why can't we just call it coronavirus?
Yeah.
I'm on board.
Yeah. Good. I'm glad we were able to reach a good
I'm on board.
conclusion.
I'm on
Reach a
board.
good conclusion. Yeah. I mean, it's not intellectually rigorous.
Like what's
It came
the
from
negative
Wuhan.
consequence
Yeah.
of calling it coronavirus? Nothing.
Nothing. Yeah.
Nothing.
Exactly.
Moving on.
Moving on. We talked about coronavirus for a minute.
We did.
Let's move
Let's
on
see. We
to
talked about coronavirus for
an hour and a half.
An hour and a half.
Good
Hour
stuff.
25.
Hope you guys
Good
liked
stuff.
it.
Yeah.
You want to move on to metaphysics?
Sure.
All right. So today we're going to talk about Arthur Schopenhauer's interpretation of metaphysics, right? So he
German?
was, German, not super respected at the time by other German philosophers. You know, Hegel, kind of surpassed him and was, more revered in terms of the German philosophical community. But after he died, a lot of important writers like Nietzsche and Freud looked at his writings and drew influence from them. So it was only posthumously that he was really respected as a, German philosophical powerhouse that I think he should be respected as. Now, obviously, he's a philosopher, plenty of flaws in his writing and his thinking, and I want to discuss that with you, right?
Sure. He's also a German.
He's also German, right? Can't trust him, right? So
not what I'm saying. Yeah, go on. Yeah.
So I'm gonna give my brief interpretation of his work. Obviously, I didn't read all of his books. It's like 5,000 pages about metaphysics. I don't have the time for that shit. So I read some cliff notes and I condensed them even further down to a couple pages here. So my interpretation is obviously gonna have some holes in it and is obviously gonna miss some points and not make the arguments as well as Schopenhauer made himself. So if you're really interested in metaphysics and his specific brand of metaphysics, I encourage you to look into it, read it, and come to your own conclusions.
Who was he influenced by? Do you know?
Kant.
Kant.
That was his biggest
Immanuel.
influence. Right, Immanuel Kant from was he from Prussia?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Arthur Schopenhauer's idea of metaphysics is really rooted in Immanuel Kant's idea of metaphysics, which is basically rooted in the idea that we each construct our own version of the world, which is completely based on our perception and our experiences. And so it's almost impossible for us as an individual to experience the world as it truly is, because all of our experiences and everything that we see and do is
done through the lens of our own experience and our own perceptions, right?
So you can never say anything objective about the external world.
Right, because it's all through your own subjective lens, right? And so Immanuel Kant makes a clear distinction between the subjective world and the objective world, and he basically reaches the conclusion that it's impossible for us to see the objective world because no matter how close we get to seeing the objective world, we're always seeing it through our own subjective lens.
Yeah, that it spurs from Descartes, that idea.
Yeah, exactly.
I think, therefore I am.
Right, exactly.
That's where it all comes from.
Exactly.
But I got a lot of problems with that idea. So, first off, the most important thing that they're trying to discuss is whether or not the external world is knowable, and we can say anything objective about the external world, right? So, the idea is that our senses can be deceived, and I think Descartes uses that we don't know if it's some demon, for instance, like the Matrix, for instance, that's controlling all our senses, and all our perceptions could be deceived, right? So I take a very pragmatic stance on this. So what is the utility of believing that the external world is not knowable and discernible and we can't say anything objective about it? What do we actually merit from that belief?
Yeah, well, just sort of continue down Schopenhauer's line of thinking here, whereas Kant draws a hard line between the world as it is, right, the nominal world, and the phenomenal world, right, our individual perspective, right, with the world. Arthur Schopenhauer instead says that, well, there is no nominal world. There is no world as it is. Instead, the world as it is just the amalgamation of all of the objective worlds that we see and that we perceive, right? That there is no world outside of our perception. There is only the, combination of all of our perceptions in the world, right? So his line of thinking is essentially that in order to get closer to that objective world, which he believes doesn't actually exist, but in order to broaden our perspective and get closer to the truth of the objective outside world, we simply need to engage and recognize other people's perspectives, right? And so by learning and seeing the world from other people's perspective, especially those who have a drastically different perspective than our own, we can get closer to the true world, the nominal world, without the phenomenon of our own subjective experience, right? Yeah. So it is a little bit of a paradox, right? That there is no objective world. There's only the amalgamation of our own perceptions. But in order to get closer to an objective world, we need to consume and see the world from other people's perspectives. So to me, that is a good pragmatic approach that everybody should try to broaden their perceptions, hear the stories of others, especially those who have a drastically different perspective on the world than themselves, right?
Yeah.
So to me, that's a good thing, right? That people should step outside of their own boundaries and try to listen to those and hear the stories of those people that are drastically different than themselves, right? That means, atheists listening to Catholics, right? That means neo-Nazis listening to communists, right? People reaching across the ideological chasms that they've constructed between themselves and other people and really broadening their perspective to see the world through the lens of others, right? And that will allow everybody to get closer to what the world really is, right?
Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of talk about this because it's a very, very important topic. So first I want to draw on the idea that there's causes and effects. So there is, let's take a family, for instance, a family relation. So you have a grandfather who created your dad, and your dad in turn created you, right? Now, are you contingent on your grandfather? Are you contingent that your grandfather exists so that your father exists so that you exist? Yes, right? To an extent.
I would say a grandfather, right? I don't know. Now we get into the semantics of would you be you if your parents were different, right? Like if there was some difference in your family tree, right, that your grandfather switched out for another grandfather, would you still be you?
Well, I'm just saying, did they exist?
Yeah.
Right?
Well, yeah.
Because
obviously,
they
did exist, right?
Yeah. Let's say you come from a line of, your grandfather had 12 kids, and your great grandfather had 12 kids, and your grandfather was the 12th child of those 12 kids. And if they only stopped at 11, then there's a likelihood that you wouldn't exist. So you could say that your existence is contingent on your grandfather's existence, right?
Yes.
So if that's the case, then you could also say that things in the world are contingent on other things,
Yes.
right? So the existence of plants is contingent that there will be water, right? So that's the relationship between things that exist in the world, right? Where it gets confusing is when you start saying that the perception of humans changes, therefore there can be nothing objective said about the external world, right? So you're contingent on your parents, for instance. So your existence is contingent on your parents. So that's the relationship that you have with them, right? So all things, while they are contingent, as you agree, can be traced back to an effect, to a cause. They're themselves the effect, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So if you can agree that there are causes and effects, that would mean that there's an infinitely retraceable set of causes, right? Infinitely retraceable. So you could go back to originally a first uncaused cause, right? So that would be a proof for the existence of God.
Right. Okay.
Right? So
Okay.
now
Okay.
let me make the connection back to your main point. So if there is a connection with God, and God is all good and omnibenevolent, then he wouldn't be a deceiver, right? Because he couldn't commit an evil act, and deception is evil, right? So here's the point.
Yeah.
Therefore, our senses aren't deceived, because God, as I stated earlier, is the uncaused cause, the initial mover. Therefore, our senses can determine the external world and are not deceived, because God wouldn't create our senses to be deceived.
Okay. I mean, that's assuming the premise that God is omnibenevolent, right? Which is a highly questionable premise, and one that's been questioned a lot in not only Christianity but a lot of religions, right? That's why Satan exists, right? Is so that there's a scapegoat to blame for all of the bad things that happen in the world. But to me, that's not doesn't fit with God's omnibenevolence, right? Also, you get the idea of free will, right? But I generally question the idea that God is omnibenevolent, right? And is a distinct being, right? So let me give Arthur Schopenhauer's and my perspective on the issue sort of the same way, right? Trace out the same argument, right? That there are wills and representation of wills in the world, right? So if I want to raise my arm, that's my will, right? That's a thought that I have in my head that results in the representation of my arm raising up in the air.
Well, that's the
right.
intellect guiding the will.
Well, no, there's a will to raise my arm, right? That's something I want to do, right? Where it comes from, I don't know. It's just back there, right?
That's the intellect.
The intellect, the will, whatever you want to call it, right?
Well, the intellect isn't.
Schopenhauer
the intellect
calls it
is distinct from the will, though. So that's what the idea of the soul comes up, which is where all the modern philosophers got their idea of the will. The will, the soul is two pieces, which is the intellect and the will. Or the soul is built up of the intellect and the will, and the intellect guides the will.
Yeah, sure. But for this specific example, we're just going to divide the world into two groups, right? Wills and representations of those wills. Souls, intellect, whatever you want to call it, right? That there are intentions to do something, and that is what results in things in the real world, right? The reason that there are buildings is because there were wills that got together and wanted to build those buildings, right? And not just human wills, but everything that you see on the planet that is the result of a living being is the result of a will, right? Now, whether that will is guided consciously or not is up for debate, right? But the reason a plant grows is because it has a will to reproduce, to produce seeds, to produce flowers, and spread, right? That's the will behind the representation of a plant growing, right? Or animals that hunt and kill, right? Or animals that eat grass. All of those actions are the result of a will behind those representations, right? Now, like you said, there's some semantics when it comes to the will, right? Is it really just one thing behind every action, or is there some intellect? Is there some sort of process that results in that specific action? I don't know, right? I cede my ignorance on that subject, right? But by looking at the world through the perspective of everything being a representation of wills, we can really see that those wills are not clearly guided, right? That although each individual has a will, all those wills are connected in some base ways, right? That people want to fulfill their desires. People want to fulfill their cravings, right? And that can not only be said for humans, but all things, right? If that is essentially the base function of those wills.
Fulfillment
right?
of desires?
Fulfillment of desires, but there's a wide variety of desires, and of course when we say desires, our mind goes to basic, maybe even sinful desires of being gluttonous or being lustful, right? But even you being a Catholic, right, and living the life of a righteous Catholic is to fulfill the desire of getting into heaven, right?
Okay, yeah, but
right.
what you're calling desire is actually the intellect, right? Because you refer to it as desire, but it's in order for the will to act on anything, in order for you to raise your arm, it has to be a conscious decision that you have to make to raise your arm.
Yeah.
All things are like that. And so that's why I say the intellect guides the will, because the intellect tells the will what it should do. The reason why people willed a building to come into place is because they had the intellect to desire to build a building. So it's the intellect that guides the will.
Yeah. I mean, to me, it's a semantic difference. To me, they're one and the same, right? The will is just the will. You can separate the intellect from that, right? But to me, it's just one thing, right? The way your brain functions, your third eye, whatever you want to call it, right? And a lot of those desires are unconscious, unthought of, right? That just have an impact on the way you act in the world, right? Not all of our desires are readily accessible and recognizable, but still have an impact on our actions and our representations of the will in the world, right? I'm getting real stuttery and stumbly here because it's a hard subject.
It's a very
right?
tough subject,
right?
Yeah.
But so back on track, right? We all have wills, right, that are rooted in fulfilling our desires, right? But and so in that way, all life on Earth is connected. That we all have wills that are there to fulfill our desires, and that is the strand that connects all life on Earth, right? But this will that some people might call God, right? Because it is the one thing that connects all living beings on Earth and in the universe even, is not guided, is not goal-oriented, right? There's no collective will. I mean, there are collective wills, obviously, right? That's how we get institutions, right, and countries, right? But our wills are sort of mindless and aimless.
No, they're not. Not at all.
No, that's why the representations of those wills clash all the time, right?
It's not because they're misguided.
No, I'm not saying misguided necessarily. I'm just saying that they are floating, aimless wills that are just trying to do the best to fulfill our desires. And because there's no tangible organization of all these wills conflict, right? And one person's representation of their will can hurt another person's representation of their will, right? I mean, we can take drastic examples like genocide as an example of that, right? One person has this representation of their will, right, that directly conflicts with the representation of another person's will, right? So we're all just kind of floating around in the world, aimless, meaningless, trying to fulfill our desires the way our will wants us to, but there's no real end goal. There's no unified driving force that makes our wills act in unity. Instead, they're full of conflict and in a lot of ways they're aimless.
Yeah,
and without a guide. Right?
So what I'm getting is that we're already determined creatures. That's kind of what I'm getting. Because if you're denying what you're trying to say is that the will is unguided, and the desires are the only thing that guides them.
Yeah.
Right. And if desires are the only thing you're guided by, then it's a, like you said, aimless will that has no purpose. Right. But the problem with that is if you believe that there is nothing that guides the will, then it's assumed it's assumed that the will clash with other wills because it has no purpose, right? But if that's the case, then the will cannot discern anything. It can't know anything because it's only led by its desires. But that's where I think we have our disagreement. I think the intellect does guide the will in its way, it helps the will decide what it wants to do, right? You call that desire. But I think humans have the ability to choose what they will, right? It sounds like it's almost determinism. What you're saying is that the will doesn't think. The will only does. It doesn't have any thinking behind it.
Right. I mean,
right? And that would be determinism.
Right.
That humans don't have free will.
Right.
And that everything is already set ahead of them, and they'll just go aimlessly towards what's already predetermined.
Yeah.
I don't believe that because I think humans have the ability to choose.
Yes, it appears that way, right? There's, I mean, we don't know any other reality other than the reality that we know now, right? So there's no real way to prove that there is a distinct alternate reality where people made different choices, right? All we know is this reality now where people made the choices that they made, right? Which is not a great argument against, free will, right? I like to believe that we have free will because it's, certainly more uplifting than the alternative of determinism, where we are destined with our destinies, and at the end of the day, we have no way of determining those destinies. It's just implanted in our desires, right? But I think that they are not necessarily at odds. I think that people can still have the ability to choose what their desires are, right? To some extent. Obviously, there are some desires that we have no control over at all, that are just innate in our genetic design, right? Like the desire to reproduce, right? That is ever present in most people, right? You have no choice over that, really. You can choose to repress that desire or not, but ultimately that desire remains there. But when it comes to loftier desires, right? Like let's say I'm a Chechen living in Chechnya under Russian occupation. I can choose that I want to dedicate my life to the independence of Chechnya, and I can become, a Chechen separatist, right? And dedicate my life to armed struggle against the Russian state, because that's what I want to do. That's what I think will bring, fulfill my desires of, bringing peace and happiness to my family. And so that's what I choose to dedicate my life to, is Chechen separatism, right? Or I can choose to be an agent of the Russian state, right? I can choose to work on behalf of the Russians here in Chechnya, because I believe that, ultimately, Chechnya can never be an independent state, and being a part of the Russian Federation is the best course of action for myself and my people, right? So I have that choice, right? But can you see how either decision, right, whether to be a Chechen separatist or whether to be a tool of the Russian state, will ultimately clash with the wills or the intellects or the desires of other people, right? If I choose to be a Chechen separatist, my purpose in life is clashing with those people in the Russian state who wish to crush Chechen separatism. Or on the flip side, if I choose to work for the Russian state, I am curtailing the wills and the desires of Chechen separatists, right? So to me, that scenario of conflict and contradictions plays itself out across the world every single day, right? People have these different desires, and even though they choose between those desires, they always clash with some other desire of some person outside of them, right? No matter what you choose, even if it's the most altruistic, good, morally beneficial desire, right? Your Mother Teresa, and all you want to do is help orphans for the rest of your life, that will inevitably conflict with some other person's desires and wills, right? And so to me, that's a clear example of existentialism in a way that there is, that we choose our own meaning in life, and we choose our own purpose in life, and it's up to the individual to decide that, but ultimately there is no preordained ultimate universal meaning or guidance or right path for us to follow, because we're guided by these desires that is unique for every single person.
Yeah.
Right.
So let me just ask you outright.
Yeah.
Do you think that killing another person is reprehensible?
On face value, yes. You'll never catch me saying murder's okay, right? But I
would
think
you
that
say
there's plenty of occasions where yes, murder was the right choice.
Okay.
World War II, classic example.
So let
should
me
the
just
U.S.
bring
have
up a
invaded
very,
Germany?
Very specific
yeah,
example.
yeah.
Let's say there's a guy, right, and he has a 2-year-old daughter, right, and for some reason he decides to smother her in her bed for no reason. Would you say that's a bad thing to do?
That is a bad thing to do.
Okay, so you're agreeing that there's some sort of hierarchy of morality by agreeing that there are reprehensible things.
My subjective hierarchy.
Okay, so even
I'll never claim that my hierarchy of morals is a universal and that everybody should follow that hierarchy. I believe that is, against the principle of free thought and free will, and that it should be up to everybody to determine their own hierarchy of morals. And ultimately, that's what people do, right? Even if there's a extremely powerful religious institution that forces morality down people's throats, ultimately every individual will determine their own moral hierarchy. Even if it's 99% similar to everybody else's, there is distinction in everybody's moral hierarchy.
Okay, so it's self-contradicting of you to say that killing another child is reprehensible, right? But still admitting that that people have the ability to choose whatever morality they want, right? It's a contradicting statement because you're saying that I know that smothering a child. Okay,
I don't know. I don't believe in absolutes like that.
Okay, I think that smothering a child for no reason, 2-year-old, is wrong, right? For you to not admit that that should be a universal idea, I think is wrong because it should be universally accepted that smothering children is a bad idea.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with that, right? And should we structure our institutions in a way that curtails the smothering of children? Yes, if that's what the majority of people believe, then that's what we should do, right?
Yeah, but if you admit that the world should stop the smothering of children, then you're ultimately agreeing that there is some sort of moral hierarchy. By merely identifying the existence of some morality being better than others, you are ultimately saying that there is a moral hierarchy.
Right. So I want to draw some distinctions here, right? That's what I believe. That's what I think is best for the world. If we stop smothering children, that would be a good thing, right? But I am not, and so establishing institutions that would curtail that sorts of actions, I think would be okay. I think that would be good. But in believing that, I still believe in people's ability and their right to question morality, right? I still believe that it is up to every individual to come to their own conclusions, and it's not the job of any institution in the world to determine morality for every single person in the world.
Yeah, well, let's stop talking about the physical world. Let's just talk about metaphysics, right? So we keep bringing up all these world examples, and usually those are pretty bad for philosophy. So if we can identify some things as virtuous and not virtuous, but some things as, what could you say, better for the continuation of a better society, such as not smothering children, then ultimately you say that there are some things that are more moral and less moral, right? That's contained within it. It's indisputable.
Right, but I mean, I think it comes back to Kant's vision of metaphysics, that reality is seen through my perspective and your perspective, right. and our individual phenomenal worlds are distinct from the nominal world, right? Yes. Yes, in our perspective, smothering children is bad, right? And acting in a way that prevents the smothering of children is a good action, right? But there is a distinction between that phenomenal drive and that phenomenal perception and the nominal perception. Now, can anybody ever access that? No, because we're humans and our perception is inherently flawed, right? We have inherent limits to our field of vision and our senses, right? So is it ever possible to find the one true moral hierarchy? I don't think so, right? Yeah. And it gets very, very messy when we're talking about big ideas like this, because obviously I don't want to condone the smothering of children, but I still want to uphold the ideas of self-determinism, of individual sovereignty, and curtail thought crime, right?
Sure. But but the thing is, if you do say that, oh, everyone should have their own perspective on morals, and that should be allowed, then what you're doing is you're passively respecting and passively letting continue the smothering of children. If you don't actively take a stance against smothering of children by just saying, well, it's up for anyone to determine if they want to smother children or not. And who am I to say that I shouldn't be able to tell them that it's a wrong act? Right? What you're doing is you're passively allowing it. So there's no middle ground. There's no, oh, well, I think smothering of children is bad because, who wants their child smothered? But, it's up for individual interpretation if they want to smother children. So what you're doing is you're saying, well, it's not for me to determine morality. Okay, fair enough. But by admitting that there is such thing as we should not smother children, then you're ultimately saying that it's morally superior in some way, which means that there's a hierarchy.
Yeah.
And also by saying, even if I don't like the smothering of children and some people do think it's good, then I shouldn't be able to say that what they're doing is wrong.
Not that last part. I don't think that
You should still be able to say that they're doing something wrong.
that's part of free speech.
Okay, so if you're saying
I have the ability. Okay, one sec. Let me tether it down a little bit, right? So in your first example, right, you said that we should allow people who believe these things that we believe are morally wrong to continue to live, right? That if someone believes in that smothering children is okay, then we shouldn't do anything about that, right? That's the world we live in right now. Thought crime doesn't exist. If someone believes in a morally reprehensible thing, we can't throw them in jail for that. And by advocating that we should take action against people because of their thoughts and their idea of morality, you are taking a step towards authoritarianism.
I'm not trying to curtail their thoughts. What I'm trying to do
Orwellian
is
thought crime.
No, I'm not trying to do that. What I'm
Right.
trying to do is curtail action. I'm
Yes,
not trying
yes.
to curtail thoughts.
And I agree that in order to,
I'm not going to convict a person of thinking that they want to smother their child. That's not what I'm asking. That's not what I'm saying. I'm only going to convict a person if they smother a child.
right, and I agree with that.
Okay,
right.
so if
so
you agree with that, then you ultimately agree that there's a hierarchy.
right, but is there a distinction between thinking something that is moral and not? Is someone's idea of morality in their head, detached from the physical world, untouchable, right? Are we allowed as a society to go into someone's head and say, that's wrong, that's right, cross that out, you got to switch those two spots, right? Are we allowed to push onto somebody's internal moral hierarchy and reconstruct that moral hierarchy to our liking, or can we only affect their actions in the real world?
So, well, there's a lot of parts to that question, right? So, let me just, I'm not going to make an assumption, but this is what I'm thinking that your ultimate goal is. The betterment of society, right? Would you say that's an ultimate goal of yours?
Yeah.
Okay. So that means that would be an ideal. So you have an ideal, perfect society in your head. All the economics that we talk, all the coronavirus news that we talk is all for the betterment of society in your mind, right? So if you're agreeing that there is such thing as a ideal society, then you're ultimately saying that there is something to strive for and something to look towards, right? So what happens when your ideal society that you've created in your mind is countered by wills and actions on Earth? What do you do?
Well, ultimately,
Because there is no achieving an ultimate society or an idealized society
Utopia doesn't exist,
without objecting against other people's wills.
yeah, and
So for you to say that there's some ideal society that's reachable, then there must mean that there are certain beliefs that have to be curtailed. And if you admit that there are certain beliefs that have to be curtailed, then it only makes sense that you have to convince people to change their beliefs in order to create this ideal society.
yeah, definitely. You make great points.
Thank
Very
you.
good.
You do too.
Very good, right? I will never try to claim that my idea of an ideal society is the objective, universal reality of an ideal society. I think that that's my personal interpretation. That's my subjective reality. That's my phenomenal world, right? And I think that in order to reach a more ideal society,
we need to maintain philosophical dialogue, the Socratic process of questioning, of bringing up issues, tearing them down, boldening our truths, right? The process that has led us to this point in philosophy, right? And if I was made dictator of the world tomorrow, right? I rule everything, real Trump style, right? Total authority, right? Although I would have the incentive to institute Orwellian thought crime ideas, right? And try to curtail what is, in my opinion, negative thoughts, greed, classism, racism, all of those things that I believe are a detriment to society. I would try to see, and this is a tricky point to make, right? But I would try to allow for the philosophical discussion and the philosophical ability to think freely within that world.
Then your ideal will never be achieved.
It will never, and because ideals are not reality, right? Utopia is never a reachable goal, right? We can only try to improve and then try to improve, and the only way to engage in that process of improvement is through the Socratic process of constantly questioning, constantly improving, and constantly evaluating our morals and the ideals that we uphold as society. And we can't do that.
What is it based on? What is it based on?
What do you mean?
Why would you want to continue betterment of society? Why would you want to continue it?
Because that's what my will wants. That's my desire. It makes me feel good to see other people be.
That's really what it is. That's your ideal.
Yeah.
But again, if you were made dictator of the world, you said that I wouldn't curtail ideas. Because that would be some sort of Orwellian thought police, right? Which it isn't. It's not. You're not going. No one's going to change their mind unless you convince them to change their mind. That's a very important distinction.
Yeah.
Right. It's not that you're going in and forcibly changing a person's thoughts. That's impossible. The only thing that you can do is try and convince them. And convincing. There's nothing wrong with convincing. Yeah. That's the whole Socratic method.
Yeah, it's very, very true, right? But you can reach a point where it's impossible to see the counter argument, right? Let's take China, for example. If you are born into a regular middle-class Chinese family in Xinjiang, right? Or not Xinjiang, that's where the Muslims live, but Hubei, right? A regular old mid-tier Chinese city, right? Your parents input a certain ideology on you because that's the ideology that you know, or that they know, right? That's what they believe, and that's what they want to perpetrate, right? And everything you see and learn in the world is in accordance with that ideology. What you learn in school, what you see in the news, what you read in books, what you see in movies. It's all within that strain of ideology and is there to promote that ideology, right? Now, you still have the ability to think freely, right? If you reach the conclusion of the alternative on your own, right? That, hey, maybe Confucianism isn't the best, right? Let's instead, embrace, Western constitutionalism, right? You could still reach that technically, right? Because the CCP can't go into people's minds and put up physical barriers, right? But by making everything in the world restricted, right, and giving no physical option to give an alternative, you can make it nearly impossible for someone to reach another conclusion, right? And to me, that is the natural progression of putting ideas above others and saying that, listen, we need to promote this moral ideology, and therefore, well, why wouldn't we take steps to make sure that moral ideology is the only one that people see, right? And sure, we can still allow, this media outlet to promote an alternative moral ideology, but if we have the ultimate goal of promoting this one moral ideology over all others, then it's a logical step to curtail that one outlet and slowly shut down all of the alternative voices that allows for that Socratic process. So do I think that we shouldn't convince each other? No, of course not. That's what we do on this podcast. We're sitting here talking, trying to convince the viewers of our own positions, right? But I think that when institutions adopt moral ideologies, that this is right and this is wrong, and use everything in their power to enforce that ideology, that's when you curtail the Socratic process, right? And I know it's hard, and I'm sure I've contradicted myself tons of times in this argument, right? But I'm just generally opposed to absolutism as a ideology, right? Nothing is absolute, and by saying that certain things are absolute over other things, you're making concrete assumptions that I don't believe that we can make as imperfect human beings with imperfect perceptions of the world, right? We're taking a leap into the world of universal ideals and concrete, untouchable ideologies that is a leap that we shouldn't be able to make as imperfect people.
Yeah, well, I think we're getting too grounded again. I think.
We got to get back up into the sky.
Yeah, well, I think we keep talking about just ideologies and whatever.
Yeah.
But I think what we're really hinting at in this whole argument that we haven't gotten to yet.
Yeah.
Is whether or not the external world can actually fully be known. Because then the whole argument
back to metaphysics.
Whether the external world can be known. Right? So there are a lot of things. So let me give my perspective.
Give me your
on this. I'm looking at the alternative. That's all I'm doing.
Yeah.
I'm looking purely at, well, what if we can't know the external world?
Yeah.
Right? And let's just say we believe that we can't know the external world. So if I have that belief of not being able to know the external world, then nothing can be known ever. Nothing. I can never determine anything. Right? And what utility does that have? Nothing.
Yeah.
But if I admit that I can know some of the external world, not all of it, but some of the external world, then that means I can actually engage in the discussion right away. See, if you believe that I can't know the external world, then there is no discussion because everything is all subjective. And nothing can be determined as true or nothing can be determined as, you can't determine the accidents of the objects, right?
Yeah.
For instance, you can never say that there's actually weight in stone. Like, the weight is contained within the object. There's no discerning the essences of things, right? Because if you deny the existence of our ability to determine the external world, then there is nothing. A desert opens up. There's no discussion at all because everyone has the ability to determine whatever they want about the external world. That means there would be no science. That means there would be no mathematics because everything is subjective.
Yeah.
Right? So if you admit that the external world cannot be known, then you admit to nothing. You admit I won't learn anything, right? But if you admit that the external world can be known and that there are certain facts about things, then you can build upon it. You can say, okay, well, what how does this affect that? But if you purely say that the external world can't be known, then it's not useful.
Yeah.
There is no utility to believing it.
Yeah.
And even if it were true, we would act as if it wasn't true. That we can know the external world.
Yeah.
So I'm looking through it through a very pragmatic. Is it useful to believe that the external world isn't knowable? No, because then no progress can be made at all. Because it's all fairy dust that anyone can determine whatever they want about the external world, and that's their perception on the world. And since everyone's perceptions are different, then nothing can be known about the external world. It's a illogical argument.
Yeah.
It's an illogical argument. That's kind of my whole picture of it.
Yeah.
Right. So what's the part two?
I just want to say I'm with you, but it's a gray area. That it's not that we know nothing of the external world, right? It's that our perception of the external world is incomplete and therefore imperfect, right? And by not knowing all of the external world, we don't know the external world in itself, right? Because without seeing all the parts of a whole, we don't know the whole, right? So I'm not saying that we can't identify anything, right? And we can't say that this is a rock and the rock is hard, right? That's something that you and I can both agree upon and build on that. Why is the rock hard? And do science and all the good things that brought us where we are now, right? But I don't really know where I was going there. I'm just saying that I agree with you, right? That saying that nothing is real and everything is fake has no purpose. It has no utility at all, right? But I think that it's important to recognize that even facts that we regard as hard and concrete and absolute, we need to take a step back and say that they're not all the way absolute, right? They're not universal truths, right? And even if we believe them as that, we need to sort of constantly question them to try to improve upon them, right?
Yeah, but okay, yeah.
Because we'll never reach the full extent of the external, absolute, true, universal world, right? We'll never get there, right? Is that something we can agree on? both as individuals and as a society. We'll never have all the questions in the world answered concretely and absolutely.
Well, I don't know. I mean, if we continue this progress that we're making, and you say that some things are improving, that would mean that through enough time that everything would be found out.
Yeah,
Right?
I mean, that
That's
seems like the conclusion of the process of scientific development and the Socratic method, right? Is that eventually we're going to reach the truth, right? I don't really believe that that's going to happen, right? The same way I don't believe we're going to ever reach utopia, right? It's just we're going to slowly wind our way in that direction, but even if it's 99.9999%, we're not there, right? And it's the same thing with objective external truth, right? I just think that recognizing that things are subjective and that we don't know the absolute truth about everything furthers the process of finding truth, right? And furthers the process of scientific questioning and the Socratic process of finding philosophical truth, right?
Yeah,
So,
which I'm totally on board with.
Right.
I'm completely on board with the Socratic method.
yeah.
We should be able to question the things that we already hold as true.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of the things that we do fully hold as true have flaws and can be improved upon.
Yeah.
What I think you're making a weird argument here because you're saying that there are certain things that we can know, but since the perception of people is changing, then there is nothing that we can know. Well, which one is it? Can we
Yeah.
know things or can we not know things?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's not necessarily as black and white as that, right? You and I know that a rock is hard, right? And we can build on that, and we can think past that. We can use that as a foundation for further thought. But that doesn't mean that we have to hold that fact as absolute and unquestionable, you know?
I do. Yeah, I do see that.
That just because we've used something as a building block in the past and we recognize it as true, it doesn't mean it's untouchable and we put it up on the shelf and we just leave it there. I think that everything that we know and everything that we think we know needs to be constantly questioned. Take it off the shelf. Really look at it, right? And because our perception is flawed and imperfect, then our idea of those truths are inherently flawed, right? Even if it's 99.99% true, there is some flaw there, and so by constantly questioning things and recognizing that our perception is imperfect, we can constantly engage in the process of finding truth, you know?
Yeah. I'm just still a little bit confused about whether or not you believe the external world can fully be known. Because if you admit that there's such thing as an ideal, then that means that there's certain truths that we should uphold, right? But if you're admitting that there's certain truths that should be upholded, that means that there has to be an imposition on people's hold their truths that they hold that are wrong, right? Because you've admitted that what your goals are for is for the betterment of society. But if you admit that it's for the betterment of society, that means that there's some goals that are not for the betterment of society.
Yeah.
Right? And you say, well, it's all subjective anyways. But if it's all subjective anyways, then why do you have the ideal and why do you want to do anything? Why do you want to strive and create and learn if it's all subjective and it all is varying from person to person?
Yeah, and that's a very good point, right? Why would
and let me make one more point here.
Yeah.
Me and you, we have very similar goals. We have very similar ideas. Why is that? Why aren't your ideas very radically different than mine?
Yeah.
Well, maybe it's because we've grown up in the same area. Maybe it's because we've known each other for a long time.
Right.
We've shared our ideas and we've reached very common ideas and common goals. So why is it that everyone doesn't just have radically different ideas? And the reason why I believe is because we have certain ideals that are exactly the same.
Within us.
Right? Yeah, within all people.
Yeah.
And so, if it's a universally accepted ideal, then that means that we should all come together and say, "Well, let's try and strive to reach this ideal."
Yeah,
I think what you're trying to do, in some of your argument, is that since there's radically different ideals, then we can't determine any ideal. We can't determine any good.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But I think the majority of the population has a very, very similar goal, which is the betterment of society.
Yeah, which is it's easy to say when you're that speaking that vaguely, right? Everyone wants the society to be better. I think you'll find very few people in the world that will object to that. Say, actually, no, I want society to be worse, right? I think that where the distinction and the the nuance in that idea really comes up is when you really dig into what people's ideals really are, right? People will all agree to the betterment of society, right? And we all want a better society, but when you really ask people what a better society looks like and what concrete steps we can take to get there, that's where you find the real distinctions and the real, divergences in people's thoughts and ideas, right? You have a significant amount of people that believe in Sharia law, and the best way to have a better society is to implement law based on the Quran from the top down, and that should be enforced by the institutions that be, right?
And you say it's reprehensible.
And but personally, that doesn't match up with my idea of an ideal society, right? But I don't want to curtail the ability or the reasoning behind that ideal, right? Just because I believe something different and I have a different perception of the world, I say I've never lived in a country with Sharia law, but from the outside it doesn't look great. Like looking at Saudi Arabia, women can't drive. They're the property of their husbands. I don't agree with that. I don't think that's the best thing, right? But because my perception is imperfect, and that other group of people's perception is imperfect, by recognizing that imperfection and learning about that different perception, we can broaden our perception of the world and get closer to the objective truth, which is ultimately unreachable. But I think that saying that my ideals are better than yours and therefore shut the fuck up, I'm right, you're wrong, is actually a hindrance to the in the process of reaching the nominal reality, the nominal truth, the true ideas that are unhindered by human perception, right? So instead of drawing the lines and the differences between our distinct ideologies and our distinct ideas, which there are many, right? There's so much diversity in the world and how we should better society. Instead, I feel like the way we reach the universal ideal is by looking across those distinctions, getting rid of those lines in the sand, and recognizing the truth in everybody's perspective, right? Which is it's very vague and hippy dippy, right? And it's hard to apply that to real life policy, right? So how should the U.S. act on that foreign policy ideal, right? I don't know, right?
Yeah.
But I root my ideas on this topic in the idea that we have a subjective perception of the world, right? And my ideals are different than someone in Turkmenistan's ideals, right? Yet both of our ideals have some truth in them, right? And I'm not saying that my truth is better than their truth, right? But that both of our truths and both of our perceptions are just one way of looking at the world, which is ultimately the truth, right? So we both have some idea of what the truth is, but without all the other ideas in the world, we can never get an idea of the whole truth.
Okay, so let me bring up a few points here. So let's just imagine. Well, let's take Nazi Germany for instance.
Yeah.
What was their goal? Let's conquer the world, baby.
Right.
Let's go out and we'll spread our space and we'll have a master race. Right. That's their ideal, that we want to own the world. We want to take over the world, right? At what point, when they reach America, when they hit New York and they start spreading throughout the country, at what point would you say, well, I can't allow this ideal to impose on my ideal?
Yeah,
because what I'm hearing is that, oh, well, we should just allow everyone to have their own basis for what they want to believe, and that we should impose on other people's beliefs because that would be wrong. So what happens when someone imposes on your beliefs? Do you in turn have to impose your beliefs on on them? So because there will be people in the future who want to impose their beliefs on you.
Yeah.
And so you just say, oh, well, I'll allow it because I'm not a firm believer in imposing beliefs or not, or I'm a firm believer in not imposing beliefs. And so he's imposing his beliefs on me. I should just accept his perception and go along with it.
Yeah.
So
I don't think it's as black and white as that. I don't think it's either I impose mine or they impose theirs on me. I think that there is a middle ground, and I think that that's what philosophy is all about, right? Now, when you have a gun attached to that philosophy, that's where the questions really come up, right? I mean, obviously, if Nazi Germany or the CCP is conquering the world, imposing their ideology and their belief system on everybody, that is a detriment to the idea of free speech and is an imposition on the process of Socratic improvement on truth, right? But So I'm against violent takeover of the world, obviously, right? I don't believe that Nazi Germany should have conquered the whole world.
So,
right?
but you're saying,
but
you're saying
if
I should not impose my beliefs on them.
I don't think see there's a distinction between the realm of thought, right, and the realm of ideas in the concrete world, right? I don't think that we should have sat by and watched the Nazis conquer Europe and then move into Africa and then move into South America and then take us over, right? That would have been bad, right? Because it would have led to an authoritarian government that imposes one ideal on everybody, right? So that's bad, right? Ideology attached with a gun to it, that's bad, and that's something I stand against, right? However, would I allow a Nazi thinker to publish books, to engage in the arena of ideas? Yes. Because I know that my truth is subjective, as is theirs, and in order to reach a more perfect truth, we need to debate the ideas. Now, debate is very different from tanks rolling into Paris, right? So there's a distinction there that I draw, right? That just because I respect somebody's free speech and their ability and their right to, have their own perspective and have their own moral hierarchy, does not mean I think that they have the ability or they have the right to impose that their perspective on everybody in the world.
You
right?
mentioned earlier that Sharia law,
Mm-hmm.
with the Muslims, that it should be a respected idea.
Mm-hmm.
That you should be able to respect the idea of Sharia law, and the whole idea of Sharia law is to conquer and spread Muslims to all peoples. And by any means.
Right. So that's seeing Sharia law from your perspective, right? When we see Sharia law, that's what we see.
That is what Sharia law is. It's not my perspective. That's the idea of Sharia law. It's not a perspective.
Have you?
That's the idea itself, is to spread.
Have you read the Quran?
Yes. Not all of
All
it,
of it?
of course.
And have you lived in a country with Sharia law?
Obviously not.
Right? Have you seen the world from the perspective of someone who believes in Sharia law?
Have I seen the world through the perspective of a person who is living in Sharia law?
No,
Okay,
not just living under Sharia law, but someone that believes in Sharia law, right? A Muslim cleric in Pakistan that believes that this is the right way. Have you recognized that although their ideology has a lot of reprehensible ideals that they try to promote, have you really seen the truth that is in every position? Have you seen the world through the perspective of someone who believes in Sharia law? And until you see the world through that perspective, I don't think that we can cross it off and use our military force to eliminate it wherever it pops up.
See, I'm still a little bit confused about what you're saying, because you mentioned that you think Sharia law is reprehensible. There's a lot of things.
So that's my perspective.
But
there's a lot of bad parts about it, right? But every perspective has a part of it that is truth.
Okay,
right?
so what is the goal of Sharia law?
A moral society. A society that follows God's will. Allah gave the angel Gabriel these ideas that were given to Muhammad, and those ideas should be followed in order to create a society that follows the will of God. It's very similar to Christianity.
And so what are the means?
It's very, very similar.
Yeah, it's a bastardization of Christianity.
It's all an Abrahamic religion, and if you look at the actual tenets of Sharia law, it's very similar to what hardline Christians believe in.
Well, okay, so I don't want to get off on the distinctions between Christianity and Islam too much, but there was Jacob and there was Ishmael, and Ishmael came from it was a bastard child of Abraham, and Jacob came from the actual wife of Abraham. But that's another point, right? Back onto Sharia law. So the idea of Sharia law is to conquer, to go out and spread this moral philosophy to the whole world. By any means. That's the real kicker. By any means. And so by saying that okay, well, we should respect the opinion of Sharia law.
Mm-hmm.
What you're saying is, I will allow Sharia law to impose its beliefs on me.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you're admitting. By merely admitting that we should consider the perspective of Sharia law, you're admitting that I will be conquered, right? Because if you identify the perspective, then what's contained, the accident of Sharia law, is to conquer. It's contained within it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so by admitting that we should consider the position of Sharia law, you're admitting that I will be conquered.
I wouldn't go that far, right? And I like to flip the question a little bit, right? In previous podcasts, you've said that the point of the Catholic Church is to convert all people, right? Which you could say is done peacefully, but time and time again, it's been done violently, with Catholic nations going somewhere, killing everybody, and forcefully converting them to Catholicism, right? And now,
Where?
South America, the Crusades, right? North Africa, right?
Okay.
All time and time again, the church has been used as a weapon to forcefully conquer and convert all the peoples of the world. Now, you believe that that's okay, and that's good.
No, I don't believe.
No,
it's
no,
okay.
no. Making everybody Catholic, right?
Yeah, I believe that's okay.
That's
but
okay.
It's the means of doing it.
Right. And so from your perspective, that's okay, that's good, because ultimately making everybody Catholic is a good goal, right?
If you-
Because
okay,
it's the right way to do. So
I don't want you to mix my words.
Yeah.
Right. But this is what I'm truly saying about the Catholic Church and the convert all nations.
Right.
Right. The difference between Sharia law and Catholicism, they both want to convert all nations, but it's the means by which they do it. The Catholic Church got rid of the idea of going out and murdering all the people. We don't have an army anymore. We used to have an army. We don't have an army. We're not going out and we're murdering people and saying you better convert, otherwise you're going to die. We're not doing that anymore. Sharia law is still doing that. We've moved away from that idea. Now, and first off, all those, Crusades, South America, okay, those were bastardizations of the idea of going out and converting all nations. The apostolic teaching is go to a place, teach them the faith, then leave. That's what Paul did. And that's what is in the Bible, in the Acts of the Apostles. Go to a place, try and convince them. If they don't believe, leave. Go to the next town and try and convince them.
Yeah.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
It's not go out and kill them. And look, I'm not saying it's a good thing. However, Sharia law, that is what it is going out and converting all the nations by any means possible.
I disagree with that point, right? Jihad is probably what you're thinking of, right? But in the Quran, jihad is only supposed to be called upon when Muslims are not allowed to practice their Islam, right? That is the only in the Quran.
Sure, it's in the Quran, but what is the practices of it?
Right, and so I would say that that's a bastardization of Islam. When ISIS is going around cutting Americans' heads off, right, in order to forcibly convert people to Sharia law, that's the same thing as the Spanish army going to Mexico and cutting people's hands off. It's a bastardization of the religion, and by saying that is what the religion is, you are ignoring all the peaceful Muslims that live all across the world that simply want to live the way God taught them to through Muhammad, right? So I think it goes both ways, right? That there's people that do horrible things in the name of religion, in every religion. I mean, even Buddhists. In Myanmar, there are violent Buddhists that kill and rape Muslims because they believe in Buddhist supremacy, right? Even those peaceful Buddhist monks that are supposed to just be chilling around in the mountains, right? Even they have a violent, reprehensible side where they forcefully convert other people to their religion, right? Every religion has bad sides, right? But in recognizing that, we also have to recognize that every religion has some morsel of truth. Even if it's not the absolute truth, right, which I don't believe any religion has the absolute truth, we need to see that Buddhism has something to say, right? And it has a perspective that other religions lack, right? And so does Taoism, and so does Islam, and so does Christianity, right? And so now, obviously, I'm not saying that you shouldn't believe in one of those. Religion serves an incredible purpose for people, right? It gives people meaning and it gives people something to live for, right? Which I uphold, and I think that's a good thing, right? Giving yourself purpose, awesome. Good for you, right? But I don't think that we should impose one moral ideology above all others and then say all the moral ideologies that don't follow this strict interpretation of morality are completely worthless and evil. In fact, right? I'm just opposed to those sorts of absolutes, right? Because I don't think that the world is made up of absolutes. It's all nuance and it's all gray.
Yeah, well, So what I'm hearing is this. Correct me if I'm wrong. That since humans are infallible, nothing is discernible. Is that right? We can't know.
Give me an elaboration on
Sure,
it.
sure.
Make a bigger sentence. I don't know those words.
So since humans obviously can do bad things and they choose bad paths according to some ideal, I won't specify.
Yeah.
But they have fallibility. They're wrong sometimes, right? If that's the case, then nothing can be known because humans are inherently wrong, right?
Yeah, I mean, I see. We're back to absolutes, right? Everything's wrong, right? Everything's right, right? I don't think it's that simple. I think that, yes, humans do things that, from my perspective, are wrong.
Okay,
you
so
shouldn't,
that's it.
You shouldn't smother babies, right?
Yeah.
But that's just my perspective, and I'll never claim that my perspective should be the universal, absolute perspective for everybody.
So
right?
now let's consider a religion that believes to have some God, and that God gave them an absolute truth. Now, wouldn't you want to spread that absolute truth? Why wouldn't you want to go out and say, "Hey, you guys all have these subjective truths. I have the absolute truth.
Yeah.
Here's the absolute truth."
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you want to do that?
Yeah.
That's the only thing you would want.
It makes sense, right?
That's the only thing you would
Right.
want to do. Okay. So let's say Buddhism has 30% truth, and let's say Islam has 65% truth, and Mormons have 2% truth.
That's something we can agree on. Yeah. Fuck the Mormons. yeah.
Mormons got like, I don't know, a fraction of a percent.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
They build nice temples. I'll give them that.
They got
they
good
look really cool. Yeah.
They do. But okay, let's just say they have like 2% truth, right? Now let's say we're having a conversation, and you ask me a question. Let's say you say, "Hey, Gabe, do you have my phone?"
Yeah.
Let's say you lost your phone. Do you have my phone?
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't not have your phone. Well, that's we could say it's a 50% truth. I
Yeah.
don't not have your phone.
Yeah.
Right. That's kind of a lie.
Yeah.
Because I do have your phone.
Yeah.
Maybe that's weird wording. Right?
Yeah. It took me a minute. I'm like, oh, dude, does he have my phone? Like, yeah, fuck.
Yeah. So like so let's say you left something over my house.
Yeah.
Do you have this? I could say, well, yes.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Or I could try and trick you.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
So if I give you only 50% of the truth, aren't I tricking you and deceiving you? That's the same. That's the same perspective.
Yeah, but I think it's to further your example, right? I could say, for example, I left my retainers at Gabe's house a long time ago, right?
Yeah.
And I remember I asked Gabe, "Hey, did I leave my retainers at your house?" You said, "I don't know," or you said, "No, I'm not sure." But let's say this, right? Do you have my retainers, right? The answer is no, right? You didn't have them in your pockets. They weren't on your desk, right? But they were in your trash can.
That's right. And so
Right?
I was deceiving you.
But in a way, you didn't have my retainers because they weren't on you. You didn't know where they were. They weren't in your pocket. You didn't have them on your person. So in a way, no, you didn't have my retainers. But in a way, yes, you did. They were in your trash can, right?
Okay.
So to me, there is always a little bit of a gray area there, right? And
Yeah.
and so you can always argue the opposite. And I think that saying it's black or it's white, kind of ignores the nuance of reality,
Yeah. Well, this is. I see this whole thing.
Yeah.
I see what you're presenting as
Yeah.
lukewarmness.
Yeah.
Right. I'm not willing to take any stance.
Yeah.
Firmly against. I'm not willing. I'm taking a stance against absolutism, right? But that's the only stance I'm taking.
Yeah.
It's not that I'm taking a stance against jihad, Islam, or against Mormonism. I think they all have great things, right? But it's an illogical argument because if you're saying that they all have good things, and that is admitting that there is an ultimately good thing, right? By saying they have some good things,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So you're admitting that there's an ultimate good thing,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. I mean,
And,
I'm
and let me just
cautious to say good, right?
Sure,
Because
yeah.
I don't believe that there's any absolute good or bad, right?
Yeah.
So saying 30% good is once again subjective,
We
right?
can just say 30% true.
30% true,
Okay.
right?
So if you're admitting that they have 30% true and the Mormons have 0.01% true, then what you're ultimately saying is that there is something that is ultimately true.
Right.
Right.
But I
By
don't
admitting that
think
there's-
it's accessible. I don't think any one person or any group of people will ever be able to get to 100% truth, right? And it's up to the individual to determine which group has 99% truth and which group has 70% truth, right? But I don't believe that there is objective, universal, absolute truth. I don't believe it exists in the world, right?
Yeah.
And we can think we got real close. We say the Bible's
real damn close, and it's an awesome, coherent ideology that leads to the betterment of society. But I'll poke a hole in it. Let me give you a criticism of Christianity, right? It doesn't respect the environment, right? In part of Genesis, when God puts all these plants and animals on the earth, he says, this is for you to use, right? You know, all these plants and all these animals are for you, right? Adam and Eve, right? They're for you to use, right? And so I think that's a hole in Christianity, that the doctrine of Christianity doesn't, not necessarily that it doesn't respect the environment, but it doesn't encourage people to respect the environment.
What are you talking
as an
about?
independent
What about
being.
Noah and him bringing on 2 of every animal?
2 of every animal, right? But
That's completely respecting the environment.
right, what about all the plants, right? God destroyed the entire world, right? And I don't know, just to me, there's no.
That's the idea. It's not that it actually happened. Remember, literal, pedagogical, all that.
Yeah.
That's strictly respecting the environment and trying to uphold God's creation, right? Like that's a very central idea to Catholicism is that we should appreciate the things that are given to us in this world. That's it.
Right. And I would say that this is the first pope to recognize climate change as a real problem, and even then, a significant amount of the Catholic hierarchy still has other priorities, right?
Well, okay.
Anyway,
but
we're getting into Catholic nuances, right? But I'm just saying, from my perspective, nothing is absolutely true. Nothing is absolutely perfect, right?
yeah, but
Because it's all created by
yeah.
humans.
And I'm
Right.
going to give a quick summation.
Yeah.
Right. If you admit that there are certain things that possess some sort of truth, right? Then what you're ultimately agreeing is that there is a hierarchy of truth. And by saying that, well, there can be 99% true, but there can never be 100% true because that's impossible. Then the 99% true is out of the window. There is no percentages. There is no 99%. There is nothing, right? So if you admit that there is some sort of 99% truth, that assumes that there is 100% truth, and you can't have the assumption of a 99% true without having 100% truth, because there's nothing to base it on.
Yeah.
Right. There is no percentages. There's no percentages as a whole, right? Because in order for you to say that this is 33% true, there has to be 100% true.
Yeah, no, I definitely understand that, and
Right.
I was basically just using that to illustrate my argument, right? And I generally don't believe that anybody has the power to determine the percentage of truth that anything has, right? You might believe that Catholicism is 100% or 99% true, right? But then someone across the world might believe it's only 5% true, and I think that both of those opinions are as valid as the other, as long as you thought about it. But ultimately, one truth of one person is different, but still as respectable as the truth of another person, right? So I might believe that, yeah, socialism is a better ideology than capitalism, right? But I'll never claim that that is the absolute truth and that everybody should submit to that without questioning, right? I don't know. I feel like we're talking in circles. We're talking in circles here, right?
In a circle at this point.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think we did. I think we hit all the good points here.
Yeah, we hit all the good points. You want to do
let's do a little
CIA,
talk.
little CIA
We'll close on
talk?
CIA.
Yeah. So we'll talk about Laos, right? And I'm just going to read a couple pages from a book called The CIA's Greatest Hits by Mark Zippesauer. And we'll read about the covert operations in Laos and, chat about it a little bit, right? So between 1957 and 1965, the Laotian governments came and went at a frantic pace, with the CIA sponsoring at least one coup a year. The problem was a leftist group called the Pathet Lao, which kept getting enough votes to be included in the coalition governments. If the Pathet Lao or other leftists were voted into office, there'd either be a right-wing coup or the legislature would be dissolved, with future elections canceled if possible. If there was an election, the CIA would stuff ballot boxes, run propaganda campaigns, and bribe legislators to try to get their candidates elected. But the CIA didn't rely primarily on such namby-pamby techniques.
There you go.
Namby-pamby. Starting in the late 1950s, they recruited a mercenary force of some 40,000 men to attack Pathet Lao forces. Known as the Army Clandestine, the secret army, about half of its members were from Thailand. The rest came from Taiwan, South Korea, and other U.S. client states. Despite the size of the Army Clandestine, the Pathet Lao had enough support in the countryside to withstand it. By 1964, another CIA coup succeeded in installing a right-wing puppet. The Pathet Lao was completely frozen out of the electoral process.
they'd begun receiving aid from the neighboring North Vietnamese, who were concerned about CIA-backed sabotage and assassination teams operating in Laotian territory. When the Pathet Lao made significant advances, the U.S. military got directly, although secretly, involved. From 1965 to 1973, the U.S. dropped over 2 million tons of bombs on Laos, far more than all sides dropped in World War II. So more bombs than both the Axis and the Allies dropped in all of World War II on this one country that's like the size of New Jersey.
That's remarkable.
That's insane.
That's insane.
And they're still there. Like, there's still children that get blown up from running out into a field and stepping on an unexploded bomb, which is nuts.
Insane.
It's insane.
That's nuts.
Yeah. The bombing was so ferocious that over a quarter of the population became refugees, with many people living in caves for years at a time. Since the CIA-run war in Laos was secret, it only received a fraction of the attention given to the war in Vietnam. The secrecy provided unfortunate for many of the U.S. soldiers involved. If killed, they were listed as casualties of the Vietnam War, but when the Pathet Lao finally took power in 1975, no prisoner exchange treaty was signed because we couldn't admit that we were running a secret war in Laos. Many of the Americans known to have been captured alive in Laos were involved in drug trafficking with the army and clandestine. If any are still alive, the CIA would have a considerable interest in denying their existence. So a little quick overview of the secret war in Laos, which was never officially declared.
Heard of it too.
Yeah, exactly, and that's what they want you to believe, right? We never went to war in Laos, even though we dropped more bombs on that tiny country.
And if they died there, they would be marked as a casualty of Vietnam.
Yeah, exactly. And if they got captured, they're never coming back.
Crazy,
it's
man.
depressing.
But
Very
America's
sad.
always the hero, right?
Right, exactly. We did the right thing, right? Yeah, just because, we wanted to curtail the democratic election of some left-wing forces, right?
Jeez.
Yeah.
Crazy, man.
Crazy stuff.
Do you want to wrap this up?
Yeah, I think that's good stuff.
Yeah, I think we talked about. We talked about coronavirus for a long
We
time.
talked about moral objective truth for a long time.
Subject.
It's a tough subject, and you made very good points. You
as well.
You caught me in lots of little corners where I'm like,
too.
oh shit, how do I get out of this? He's got me good, But
we came out with strength and arguments.
Once again, love the Socratic process. That's how we find our truths, and that's how we constantly push for that unattainable goal of the real truth.
Oh yeah, the unattainable.
Yeah.
Anyways, thank you all for listening.
Thanks for
This has
listening.
been the Outlet Podcast. If you made it up to this point, we love you.
Like and subscribe and comment.
Like and subscribe and give us a comment down below. Join the discussion. We don't want it to end here.
Exactly.
All right. Thank you all for listening.